Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
Have you ever tried hitchhiking? If you have, then stop doing it. And if you haven't, then don't even think about trying it. I'm not being bossy or anything. I'm just suggesting this from my own personal experience. I used to do hitchhiking a lot, and being a girl made it a lot easier too, until that last incident that made me avoid it. That night there was a birthday party for one of my friends, and it was held on the outskirts of town. I took a cab to go there along with a few friends, but as the party was about to end, everyone was so drunk and most of my friends were nowhere to be seen. Some of them said that they would stay overnight at a nearby place, but I could not afford such a thing because my parents would kill me if I'd stayed overnight anywhere. So I decided to hitchhike. I took out my thumb and started showing it to the passing cars. A white car stopped in front of me. I told him my destination, but he said he was going in a completely different direction and drove on. The next 3 cars passed by me without stopping. I checked the time and it was past midnight. I kept thinking that my parents are going to be pissed if I reach home any later. And that was when a blue car stopped in front of me. The person pulled down the glass window and it was a very good looking guy. He asked me where did I need to go, and I told him my destination. "Come on in, I'm also heading the same way." He said in a cheerful tone. I figured he must be a nice and helpful person, so I got in. One thing that I always did while hitchhiking was that I was always giving fake names to them. And that is the reason when he asked me, I gave him a fake name as well. He started asking me questions such as where I was coming from this late at night, and do I have a boyfriend or not? I started to feel awkward about all these questions, so I started to answer them with a yes or no, which I guess he sensed that I did not want to answer him. There was this weird smell that kept coming from his car the entire time I entered it. It was as if one scent was trying to cover another. I just could not point my finger on what it was. That was when I noticed from the front mirror that something weird was falling on the floor of the back seat. I did not want to make it obvious that I was looking at something in his car, so I sneaked a look when he was completely focused on the road. I'm sure that there was a finger with a blue nail polish on it. It started to freak me out. I was getting scared by the thought of him doing something to me. I knew that I had to get away somehow, but I just did not know what excuse to make. It also was weird that he was unusually quiet for the past few minutes, so I looked at his face and noticed a weird expression on it. Now, I was sure than ever that I needed to get away from this guy no matter what, and that was when I saw the gas station. "Hey, can you make a stop there? I really need to pee badly," I said while giving him a big fake smile. He bought it and stopped the car. I rushed to the bathroom and locked it from the inside. All that was remaining for me to stall his time until he gives up and leaves. So I stayed in there for about half an hour. I noticed him impatiently blowing his horn the entire time, and then it stopped. As I was thinking that he may have left and was about to unlock the door, I heard footsteps coming in the bathroom direction. So I held the door tightly, and he started banging on it. The more time it took, the banging got louder, and I could just feel how frustrated and impatient he was by the way that he was banging on the door, as if he wanted to break it if he needed to. I was shaking in fear and praying for him to leave, but even after an hour passed, he did not leave and continued stomping in front of the bathroom door. His every footstep was making my heart sink. I thought that he had made up his mind about killing me. I took up my phone with my trembling hands and started searching for someone who might be able to help me at this hour, but I couldn't find anyone. That was when I heard other voices of men asking him what he was doing out there at this hour, banging on the door. He hesitantly replied that his friend was stuck in the bathroom. Before opening the door, I thought of looking through the peephole, and when I did, I saw 2 men and a woman in police uniform asking him all these questions. They looked quite suspicious of him, and they started asking more questions to him. He got nervous and walked back to his car. The woman officer kept standing outside the bathroom door this entire time, as she did. And then she said, "You can come out now, we will help you." I hesitantly unlocked the door and stepped out from the bathroom. The man who was entering his car looked at me with an angry look before driving off. The officers asked me what happened, and I explained to them everything from me exiting the party and hitchhiking in his car to me hiding in the bathroom. They assured me that they will help, and the woman officer said that she was about to leave for the station that was in the same direction as me, so that she could drop me off. I agreed, and the officer was a very nice lady. She dropped me off right in front of my house. Afterwards, I thanked her. She gave me some advice to never hitchhike because you never know what kind of person that stranger might be. I still keep thinking about that finger of some woman in the person's car and what may have happened to her. But I'm thankful to this day that those police officers arrived when they did. Maybe it was my luck. Otherwise, God knows what may have happened to me.
The unfortunate fate of having to work on Christmas had fallen upon me, but it wasn't just any ordinary work day. I had to wear a Santa elf costume and distribute presents to children. As an orphan, I never had a family to celebrate the holiday with, and after aging out of the foster system, I was forced to fend for myself. My life was consumed by work, and I never had the opportunity to make friends. Thus, I found myself alone on this day that held no significance to me. However, standing alongside the fake Santa and handing out gifts to children, I never anticipated that this Christmas would become a haunting memory. The clock struck late and I began my journey back home. Fatigue weighed heavily on my body as exhaustion took over. I suddenly felt a presence behind me, and my uneasiness grew. I turned around to face an empty road, and the darkness only added to my fear. It was nearly 3 in the morning, and I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was amiss. I continued walking forward, attempting to ignore the nagging sensation. As I walked, my lack of sleep caught up with me, and I yawned incessantly. At that moment, I heard another set of footsteps matching my rhythm. I turned around quickly, but there was no one in sight. The road seemed to stretch infinitely into the pitch-black darkness beyond, and my heart began to race. I was alone, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. My apartment was still a bit far, and I was walking past a park in the neighborhood when I heard a clanking sound behind me. For some reason, it seemed to be coming right behind me, yet sounded so far away. I gulped as I hesitantly turned my head to the side and saw another shadow similar to mine because of the illuminating streetlight. The feeling of terror peaked in my gut as I halted my steps, and to my horror, the shadow behind me halted as well. I don't know why, but I felt I should not turn around to face whoever it was and began to walk faster. However, the shadow moved just as fast, watching my movements. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling and reason that it was just a coincidence, but then the clanking sound got louder and closer. My heart was pounding in my chest as I finally turned around to face my stalker. But to my surprise, there was still no one there. I was alone in the middle of the street with no one around for miles. I stood there for a few moments trying to catch my breath and calm my nerves. As I continued my walk, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. I stopped in my tracks and turned around, scanning my surroundings, but just as before, there was no one in sight. I tried to shrug it off and continue on my way, but the feeling of fear lingered. While walking, I felt as if my mind had started to play tricks on me. Every rustle of leaves or creak of a tree branch made me jump. I was hyper aware of my surroundings, and I couldn't help but feel like something was lurking in the shadows. A few minutes later, the feeling of horror returned, and this time, it was stronger. I felt someone breathing down my neck. I could hear their hot breath in my ears. My heart raced as I whipped my head around, but there was no one there. The breathing sound still vividly etched in my memory. I knew I wasn't mistaken. It could have been my sleep-deprived mind that made me hallucinate, but I can't say it wasn't real. The terror I felt was more real than anything I had ever experienced before. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my keys. My eyes darted around, searching for any sign of danger. I quickened my pace and practically ran toward my apartment, my heart pounding in my chest. My heart was beating so fast and loud that I could hear it in my ears. I was in a hurry to reach my apartment building and quickly entered the elevator. As the doors closed, I finally breathed a sigh of relief, but my heart was still racing. I couldn't shake off that feeling of being followed. My mind was racing with questions. Was it just my imagination? Or was there really someone following me? The thought of a ghost following me sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't wait to reach the safety of my apartment. As I inserted the key into the lock and turned it, my heart raced with anticipation of finally being home. Suddenly, I felt a sudden jolt to my shoulder as someone's hand grabbed me from behind. I couldn't help but jump, thinking it was the shadow that had been haunting me. But when I turned around, I saw my drunk neighbor standing there with a creepy smile on his face. Although I was relieved to see him, his unsettling smile sent shivers down my spine. I asked him if he needed any help, but he just kept smiling and slurring words. I didn't want to engage him any further, so I quickly retreated to my apartment, locking the door behind me. The rest of my Christmas night was spent in fear, every creak and groan of the apartment sending my heart racing. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was watching me. I was relieved when the nights passed without any incident. However, my relief was short-lived when the next morning I was awakened by a commotion outside. When I went to check what it was, I was met with a truly terrifying piece of news. My neighbor, who I met last night, had died yesterday afternoon. I felt a shudder down my body as I realized who I encountered was... It was the day when I was supposed to fly back to Dallas from Boston through Southwest Airlines. The time for my flight was 2:45 a.m., so I asked my boyfriend Austin to drive me to the airport around 1 a.m. He wanted to wait till I boarded the plane, but I sent him back since he had work early in the morning and he needed his sleep. As I was waiting, I realized there were fewer people than I expected. The airport was almost empty. Only a few staff members and around 5 people, including me waiting for the flight, were there. I looked around while waiting, and even the people who were already present there seemed a little weird. They all had their head down, not speaking a single word, and not even making any movement. It looked as if they were all some sort of statue. That was when the pre-boarding announcement started, asking for us to have our boarding passes and identification ready for the regular boarding, which was about to begin in approximately 10 minutes. I had everything prepared already, and the documents were in the left pocket of my purse, so I took them out and held them in my hand. After a few minutes of waiting, the boarding started. I went toward my boarding gate and boarded the plane. As I was going to my seat, I noticed the passengers to be weirdly quiet. The way they were in the waiting area earlier, an uneasiness started to take over me, and it felt as if the atmosphere of the plane was slightly frightening. I tried shaking it from my mind and went to my seat. The flight was supposed to reach Dallas in 3 hours and 38 minutes, and I had brought a book that I had been reading for the past few days, so I took it out and started reading. "Excuse me, do you mind moving your purse? That's my seat." I looked up as I heard the voice of a man. Sorry, I thought no one was coming." I moved my bag while apologizing and then went back to reading my book. I noticed everyone had turned their head towards us, but the gazes were focused on the man. I wanted to avoid this weird feeling I was getting, so I went back to reading my book. The man tried talking to me a few times, but I tried to act as if I was too focused on the book to be able to hear him. So after 3 or 4 tries, he just gave up. Something happened after that which crept me out. That guy put his face between my book and me, and then started laughing like a maniac as if it was hilarious or something. "Watch your manners, mister," I said while gritting my teeth in anger. "Mr. Mandel," he smiled. "I don't want to know your name. Just mind your business and let me mind mine," I said, and went back to reading my book. "Fine. I just wanted to be friends." He stood up and started going toward the toilet. After half an hour passed, he didn't return, so I started to grow a little concerned about the stranger. I looked around to see if he had exchanged seats with someone, or maybe he had gone to sit in a different one, but he wasn't anywhere. Strangely, some of the passengers who I'd seen earlier had disappeared too. The atmosphere of the plane had changed in a weird and dark way, and it was extremely frightening. Avoiding problems is what I do best, and this time I wasn't thinking of this as my problem. Instead, I thought it just must be my imagination. So I leaned back, closing my eyes and thinking that I shouldn't worry about a stranger. He might return himself when he wanted to. Even after closing my eyes though, I couldn't stop thinking that something was wrong. I kept ignoring all these weird intrusive thoughts, but that was when I started to hear the eerie noises coming from every direction. So I clenched my eyes even tighter, because if I knew or saw the source of these sounds, I might not survive. I kept telling myself it was all because I was alone and imagining things to scare myself. I didn't have the courage to open my eyes. All of a sudden, I heard Mr. Mandel scream, and I thought he was on it again. His weird, creepy pranks to become friends with me. Even then, I did not open my eyes, and I ignored him, but his screams did not stop. Stop doing this! This is not fun! I finally opened my eyes and turned around to scream when I witnessed the most horrifying scene. Around 10 passengers were sitting down, tearing the man apart from their teeth, blood all over their bodies, and the rest of the passengers were quietly looking at them with a weird, scary shine in their eyes. I froze, terrified. The man looking into my eyes screamed and pleaded for help, but none of them took notice of me or turned their heads towards me. It was like for them, I wasn't even there. And I wanted it to stay like that, so I gave the guy an apologetic look. Tears fell from my eyes, and the moment his screams stopped, he had accepted his fate and understood that I was in no position to help if I wanted to save my own skin. I crouched down and hid my face between my knees while closing my eyes and hoping that they don't notice me the same way they had until now. The person who had never prayed in her life before, I was praying to God for my life and begging for those people to disappear. I was so terrified that I started crying like a baby, and I was sure that this was the last day of my life. I thought I should raise my head and take a look around, but I couldn't. I tried pulling my head, but it felt so heavy that I couldn't raise it. "Excuse me, the flight has landed." I was able to open my eyes the moment I heard this voice. It was him. It was the same guy who was torn apart in front of my eyes, but now he was all fine. I looked around, and everything seemed normal, but my heart was still thumping like crazy. "Why are you crying? Did you have a nightmare or something?" he asked again, and I touched my cheeks only to find them wet from all the crying. Instead of replying, I took my stuff and got off the flight. I rushed out of the airport as soon as possible and called my doctor. "Hello, Linda. You have to help me. I got another nightmare today." This happened a few years ago, but upon hearing the Reddit stories my classmates were sharing, it reminded me of the incident that happened to me. It was around the late 2010s when my mom took me to Grandpa's house, who was a retired military man. He used to tell me all the stories of the times when he was serving the country and how he managed to survive all the high times when I lived here till the age of 12. But for the past few years, he was suffering from severe dementia mixed with some mental illness that I had no idea about. Living in the countryside, Grandma did not trust that doctors would take good care of him in this condition, so she did not admit him. Anyway, as we entered the neighborhood talking in the old nostalgic smell of our surroundings, a guy who looked familiar approached us. For a few seconds, the two of us stared at each other trying to recognize when he hesitantly said, "Kevin?" At the same time, I recognized him as well and I asked, "Are you Fred?" He smiled wholeheartedly and replied while asking at the same time, "Of course, dude. How long has it been? Are you here for good now?" "No, Ma and I are just here to visit Grandpa." I shook his hand as he welcomed me while informing him of the purpose of our visit. Ma also hugged the guy as the two of us used to be best friends, and he practically used to live with us, looking at the amount of time he spent at our house. "Yeah, I heard his condition has gotten worse," he said, trying to look away, followed by another sentence. "Okay then, enjoy your visit. See you around, Aunt Teresa. Kevin?" And then he left. When we were walking by the grocery store, Mom thought she should buy some things since she did not know how Grandma was managing alone, so I followed her inside. She brought some fruits and healthy stuff, then tried to call Grandma to ask if there was anything she needed at home. But just like before, she still did not pick up. "Why isn't Ma picking up her phone from last night? Doesn't she know people would get worried?" she mumbled in frustration, and then asked the counter boy to ring up the items she had brought. When we were done, I followed Mom, trying to catch up to her steps as she was walking way too fast in a rush to reach early. The moment we stepped foot in the house, a nasty metallic stench hit our nose that filled in the entire house. Mom and I looked at each other in confusion, then rushed inside trying to find the source of the blood, when we stopped near the stairs, horrified at what was before our eyes. The entire floor was filled with Grandma's blood dripping through her head and legs, while she lay dead on the floor at the end of the stairs. At first glance, anyone would say that she may have fallen from the stairs, and this is the result of that. But looking closely, there were clear signs of struggle on her body. Grandma's room was upstairs, so we had to carefully cross the dead body if we wanted to go check on him. But since we did not want to contaminate any possible evidence suspecting it to be a murder, we thought it'd be best if we called the police first. Ma dialed 911 and informed them about the situation, while I went around the house trying to find if Grandpa was somewhere other than in his room. After the arrival of the police, we informed them that our sick Grandpa was upstairs, and we needed to bring him downstairs if he needed constant care. So they agreed and carefully managed to bring him downstairs. By looking at Grandpa, he seemed sick looking at how he continued staring into the air without uttering a word. Grandma's body was sent for autopsy, and the samples for the fingerprints. Officers already informed us that there was no sign of someone else other than the two elderly in the house, so the possibility of her death by falling down the stairs was higher. The way they emphasized the word two elders almost made it seem like he was suspecting Grandpa of murder, but it was impossible since Grandpa was the kind of guy who had never even raised his voice at her, so raising hands would be out of the question. Grandpa's room was prepared in the left third one downstairs, and after helping him with his medicines and feeding him some fruits, Mom went ahead to prepare dinner. We were all mourning Grandma, but to tend to Grandpa we had to stay normal. So I thought maybe if I tell him one of the stories that he used to tell him, it could help him jog some of his memories. But I started the story, Grandpa weirdly looked at me, and then all of a sudden, he lunged at me while saying, "How dare you infiltrate our camp and kill one of my comrades?" His voice was filled with rage and resentment as he grabbed me by the throat. I struggled to get away from him, but surprisingly, he was unbelievably strong. That was when Ma walked in and rushed to us while screaming. She somehow managed to get him away from me, and as he tried to chase us out of the room, she locked it. "Ma, do you think?" I hesitantly asked. "Yes, I think it was him. The struggle signs must be from a similar experience as you," she said in a slow voice as tears started dripping down her face. "I don't think it's safe to let him stay at home. We ought to admit him, Ma," I said. "I'm thinking the same, son," she said in a defeated voice as she walked back to the kitchen. The next day, we admitted him to the hospital urgently and informed the doctors about his worsening condition. The doctor told us that it was common in dementia patients to live in memory and mistake people for someone else from the past as they don't recognize them in their current condition. But it was rather unfortunate that the memory Grandpa was clinging on to was something from the time he was fighting in the army. Autopsy reports also concluded that the fingerprints found on her neck were indeed Grandpa's. It must be when she was near the stairs that he strangled her, but she somehow managed to get away from his grip and fell down the stairs, resulting in her death. The trials were to be held in the next 15 days, but before they could pass any form of punishment, Grandpa died in the hospital. I guess it must be in Grandma's luck to die before Grandpa, but whatever the case, both of the deaths were quite unfortunate for us to witness. Why is there a story circulating about me on Reddit? I stomped into the classroom and shouted over Jenny. Why are you asking me? How would I know? She replied calmly as she continued looking at her book. You know exactly why I'm asking you that, I said with gritted teeth. Why would I? She got up after saying without meeting my eyes, walking to the exit of the class, and once again I could only clench my fists in anger. Do you know my car has that little feature that records everything which I had to install due to an issue? You didn't know about that before pulling that little stunt, did you? Should I just upload that? I said in a slow, angry voice which made her stop in her tracks. I met Jenny a few months ago when I entered this campus for the first time. She was standing near the fountain talking to her friends, and among them was standing my elder sister, whom I had stopped talking to for the past 3 years. She was 2 years older than me, and if you're thinking that might be the reason for not talking to my sister, well, that is a story for some other time. Anyway, I walked past them completely focused on ignoring my sister. Guess that must be the reason I couldn't notice the lingering gaze of someone else on me. After getting the details of my class schedules, I went directly to attend the first lecture that was about to start within a few minutes. Upon entering the classroom, my eyes looked around the classroom trying to find an empty chair, which I found in the second back row. So I walked to the chair and took a seat. A gorgeous-looking professor who must be in her late 30s entered the classroom right after me, and the lecture started. My focus was entirely on the lecture when the professor looked at me, paused the lecture, and asked me to introduce myself. Hi everyone, my name is Sebastian Huffman, I said in a slow tone, and as she heard my name, she immediately asked, Huffman? Are you Eva's brother? Yes, I replied, feeling bitter inside. As she was about to say something else, the same girl I saw among my sister and her friends entered the classroom, and the teacher's attention shifted toward her. Jenny, you're 20 minutes late for class. How many times should I tell you to stop hanging out with seniors during your class time? Professor said while she carelessly looked toward me while replying to her. It won't happen again, Miss Anastasia. And then she walked in my direction and stopped right in front of me. You're sitting in my seat, dude. Move, she said in a demanding voice. I did not find your name written on it. Why don't you go and sit somewhere else? I might have been a new student, but I wasn't the kind who would let others step on me. Jenny, what are you still doing standing there? Go and sit on that empty last seat and stop bothering the new student, Professor said strictly, which made Jenny glare at me annoyingly, and then walk to the back seat muttering something in her mouth that I couldn't quite understand. For the rest of the day, I noticed that only a few of my lectures clashed with Jenny's, so I was relieved because I didn't want any kind of trouble on my first day. It was better if other people stayed out of my business and let me just live my silent, peaceful life alone. But that hopeful thinking didn't last long when 2 boys came to me and started talking on their own. My attention wasn't on their conversation, so I did not know what they talked to me about, as I was just replying with yes or no. They noticed on their own that it would be useless trying to talk to me about my nature, so they went back to their seats on their own. The next day went like that. Jenny would keep glaring at me and students would try to talk to me, but then they would back off on their own. Only Professor Anastasia seemed a bit different. She was nice and talked only about the things related to her lectures. Sometimes here and there she would also ask if I was settling among others okay, or if the classes seemed understandable, to which I replied yes or no as well. But she seemed fine to me, and gradually I started to develop a crush on her, and her lectures became the only thing in the class I looked forward to. There was one guy whom I'd made friends with, Ben. He was quite a shy student, but we ended up becoming friends due to a combined project. Later I found out that Ben had a major crush on Jenny, which to be honest was quite a shock given her personality. One evening when Ben asked me if I wanted to grab a few drinks with him in the nearby bar, so I met him there, and I was shocked when I saw Jenny walking in and taking a seat among us. I know you don't like her, but please for my sake, bear with it. Ben sensed the tension in the air, so he whispered in my ear. I had no other choice looking at the situation, so I agreed. We started drinking, but after 2 glasses I stopped since I could get easily drunk. But Jenny passed another filling glass with me saying, "Don't be a puss, only cowards can't handle their drinks." I don't know if she was saying that to get on my nerves or something else, but it worked. I drank another 3 glasses continuously. The last thing I remember was the fading voice of Ben, who was asking me if I'd be able to go out on my own. When I woke up, I was having a splitting headache and I couldn't remember anything that happened last night. After taking some hangover medicine and freshening up, I took out my car and started to drive to college. I had a habit of checking Reddit to see if there was something new on it when I saw a story posted by someone implying the worst thing that could happen to a guy. The post was written by a girl who claimed that I was a big pervert. I had bad intentions for our professor, and late night in a drunken state, I tried to take advantage of a girl. She claimed that she would never reveal her identity because she was afraid her reputation would get tarnished. After reading it, I stopped the car, and I tried hard to remember what happened last night when it started to come back to me. Jenny sent Ben off home and said that she would drop me off in my car, claiming she knew my home since she was the friend with the sisters. She did take me to my car, but instead of taking me home, she started unbuttoning my shirt. I was still in little sense, so I resisted her. When she tried forcing me to sleep with her, I pushed her, saying I liked someone else. She stopped and glared at me, asking whom it was. I mumbled Professor Anastasia's name before passing out. The moment I remembered everything, I felt nothing but rage. So I started the car and drove to the college, determined to confront her in front of everyone, as I had already mentioned before. I'm not the kind who would let others step on me.
It was the happiest day of my life. After years of dedication and hard work, I was finally promoted to the position of manager in my company. And that was not all. I proposed to the girl I'd been dating for the past 5 years, and she said yes to me. What more could a guy ask to be happy? I could not contain the amount of happiness I was feeling and kept smiling foolishly. Thinking about all the good things that kept happening one by one, I was driving back to my apartment while humming a song. I do not know if I did not see the light or something, but if that truck driver took the wrong turn and hit my car, and soon enough, I was in a car accident. I could hear the voice of my bones breaking, the sharp, uncontrollable pain when the pieces of glass pierced through my skin, and the throbbing pain that I was feeling in every inch of my body. I saw a gush of blood coming out of my head and some other parts of my body with a stinging sensation. Before passing out, I could feel the agony I was in at the moment of the accident. I don't remember much after that. I woke up vaguely in the hospital, and I guess it was the surgery room. Again, I woke up in the surgery room. I don't know if anyone was around or not because I couldn't see or hear anything. But I was aware of the fact that I was awake. After a few moments, I heard the voice of my fiancée, Agatha, who was talking to someone, and I could tell from her hiccups that she was crying. I guess my being in this state may have broken her heart. After that, I was asleep again. Again, I woke up when I heard the voices of my mother, Agatha, and the male that I guess must be the doctor. He was telling them that there was nothing they could do and that I was dead. I could not believe him. I was alive, and he was telling my family that I was dead. Thinking I should confront him, but no matter how much I tried, my voice just wouldn't come out. I couldn't even open my eyes or make any sort of movement from my body to let them know that I was alive. Am I dead? Is this what happens when someone dies? That was what I started to think. I guess I was only regaining consciousness for a brief period because, again, I fell asleep after that. The next time I woke up, I could feel that I was getting carried somewhere through the stretcher, and then I lost consciousness again. This time when I woke up, I could feel a chill going through my entire body. So I tried opening my eyes, and somehow I managed that this time, I was able to see. I was in this little cramped box which was feeling colder than a refrigerator, and that was when it hit me. I was in a morgue's refrigerator. I couldn't believe it. Not only did they presume me dead after checking thoroughly, they even put my body in a morgue. My body was covered with these white sheets which were not enough to keep me protected from the temperature of this place. I could feel the numbness going through my body little by little, and the pain surging along with it. I tried moving my hand, but I could only move my fingers. My breathing was getting heavier by the second, and the more I felt the awareness of the place, the more suffocated I was feeling. That was when all of a sudden the coldness started to get a toll on my mind, and I started to feel my vision getting blurry again. I had already gotten a death-like experience, and I did not want to die for a second time as well. So I tried my best to stay conscious even though my entire body had been frozen by this time. But I failed to keep myself awake and lost consciousness once more. I don't know if it was my luck or God just did not want me to die just yet. I woke up right when I felt the freezing of the place getting a bit slower. Either they had closed the refrigerator willingly or there had been a power cut. But whatever it was in my favor. I don't know if I should feel lucky or terrified of the fact that I was not yet in a state, but I could only hear whatever was happening in my surroundings. The suffocation, the fear, the awareness of the morgue, and the smell that was coming from the cabin I was in were just nauseating. I cannot describe to you in a way that you would understand the feeling that I was getting at that moment. I was surrounded by dead bodies, but I was still alive. All I could do was wish that someone opens the door of this and takes me out of this place. To break it to you how I was spending my time there was that I kept losing and gaining consciousness. I don't know how many times I thought that I was already dead and may have come back as a ghost, but I still kept hoping that it'd not be the case. The last time I gained consciousness, I was getting pulled out of there, which made me feel relief. I opened my eyes and continued to move the only part of my body that I could move, my fingers. The moment the guy saw my open eyes and moving fingers, he started screaming at the top of his lungs and ran out of the morgue. After a while, a few other people came rushing inside and took me to another room to check if I was alive. They put me on life support and called my family. I saw my mother and Agatha caressing my face and crying like children from the happiness that I was alive. And after 2 months or so, I was able to speak again and move other parts of my body as well. I'm still in the hospital getting treatment and recovering from my injuries, but one thing that has added to my health is the trauma of me being in the morgue. Each time I fall asleep or close my eyes, I feel like I'm still in there, and whenever I would open my eyes, I would find myself stuck there. But I'm relieved every time I open my eyes and I'm alive, and I'm also able to move my body. The one thing that I'm sure about is the day I got discharged from the hospital. I'm never going to step a single foot in another hospital ever again. I was working as a morgue assistant in a hospital, and the morgue of the hospital was infamous among the workers to be haunted. But from the past 6 months that I've been working there, I never saw any kind of ghost or any sort of paranormal activity around me until one day. In the hospital, shifts usually got rotated, and that day, I was on night duty. You might think that the hospital gets less busy during the nighttime than the day, which may be true for most hospitals, but not this one. The hospital I worked in was usually busy during the day too. Yes, the daytime was busy because of the rush hour. The main reason for this hospital to stay busy during the nighttime as well was because it was the nearest hospital to many such places where accidents took place. But that night was unusually quiet and fewer dead bodies were brought in. I had just completed the autopsy of the man that was brought in, and I put his body into the morgue's cabin when I was informed that another dead body was brought in. So I went ahead to check the body, and it was badly disfigured. I could tell that he had died more than 10 hours ago. On top of that, the body was unidentified as well. It was supposed that the person was murdered and the autopsy was required to find out his identity. I was already tired from performing autopsies one by one, so I decided to take a short break before cutting open another corpse. I went to the hospital canteen to get some coffee where I saw Dr. Fresco. I got mesmerized by him for a few minutes. Yes, you guessed correctly. I had a teeny weeny crush on him, but he had already had a girlfriend. She was one of the most brilliant doctors working here, and I was nothing compared to her. Well, I don't dream big either. After having my coffee, I walked back to perform at the morgue because it was better if I start working now. And you never know, things might start getting busy again. As I was walking towards the morgue, I felt an unpleasant smell in my way, which was only getting stronger as I got closer. Another thing that I noticed was that it was unusually quiet and there was no one around except for me, which was strange because there was always someone present here, a mortician or someone from the housekeeping. I took out the mask from my pocket and wore it even though it could not control the rotten smell that was coming. There was no way that it was coming from any of the corpses because all of them were put in the refrigerator. None of them were anywhere near decomposing. So I walked inside the morgue and started checking each cabin to where the smell was coming from. After going through each one of them, I was relieved to see that they were all fine. Now, there was just one last body to check, which came in not too long ago. The body of the unidentified man, which I was yet to perform the autopsy on. But when I opened his cabin, I was shocked to see that it wasn't there. I looked around to see if someone took it out for an investigation purpose, but no matter how hard I looked, it just wasn't there. That was when I heard the sound of the door opening and turned back to look at it, but no one was there. The door was moving back and forth a bit as if someone had just left. So I ran after that only to see someone walking away. It was more like he was dragging his body away. Called out for him, but all of a sudden he disappeared. I could feel the rotten smell also disappearing along with it. I was too petrified to move when I felt someone's hand over my shoulder and I jumped away all scared. But I felt relieved to see that it was Mr. Finn, the mortician. "Why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" he said with a light chuckle while walking inside the morgue. "I think I just did, Mr. Finn," I said with an anxious voice. "Oh really?" I could feel the lightness in his voice and understood that he wasn't taking me serious. "I'm telling you the truth. You know that an unidentified man's body was just brought in, right?" I asked him. I was dead on telling him what just happened, and there was no other way to explain the missing body as well. "Yeah, I do know about that," he said while focusing his complete attention on me. "Well, I put his body in the cabin in the presence of the other mortician whose shift is right before you, and was going to perform the autopsy right after a short break. But then I got back and he wasn't there. I saw his dead body walking down this hall before he got here. I told him all this in one breath, and he raised his eyebrow on me. I still felt that he did not believe me. So, if what you're saying is true, then the man's body wouldn't be here, right?" After saying that, he walked ahead and opened the cabin. I was surprised to see the body was there, as if it had been there the whole time. But I looked at him with a dumbfounded expression on my face and couldn't say anything else. "Listen to me very carefully, Penelope. This morgue's atmosphere can put a toll on one's mind, so never let this place fool you, because what you see is not always true." He said this with a very serious and calm tone. After that, the two of us started performing the autopsy on the man's body, and as we were done, he looked at me once again with a serious look and said, "I always thought of you as a daughter I never got the chance to have, and you're still young and can achieve many things in your life. So stay strong and never stop believing in yourself." He put his hand on my head, and after saying that, he smiled a very soft and beautiful smile just before leaving. As he left, I finished cleaning up and put the body back in the refrigerator. For some reason, the horror scene from before wasn't that terrifying anymore, just after talking with Mr. Finn. Instead, I was feeling calm and confident. I decided that even if I were to get face-to-face experience with any ghost, I will try to stay strong and not phase out. After about an hour or so, I was informed about the last body that was brought in last night, and it was that of an old man who had died in his sleep. The moment I heard of it, I rushed towards the body to see if it was true or not. But when I saw him, tears started to stream from my eyes. It was him. It was the body of Mr. Finn.
For weeks, I had been counting down the days to finally see my girlfriend Lisa, who lived far away. I had planned to spend New Year's Eve together by making it extra special by surprising her with an unexpected visit. I spent hours researching flights and ultimately booked one for December 30th. As I boarded the plane, my heart was racing with excitement and anticipation. After a long journey, I finally arrived in Lisa's town on the evening of December 31st. As I walked through the streets, the sounds of laughter and fireworks filled my ear, adding to my excitement as I made my way to Lisa's doorstep. I couldn't wait to see her reaction when she saw me standing there. However, as I arrived at her house, I was surprised to find a lively party in full swing, with guests chatting, laughing, and dancing throughout the house. Despite my initial excitement, I soon realized that my girlfriend was nowhere to be found. I searched through the throngs of unfamiliar faces, hoping to catch a glimpse of Lisa, but my efforts were in vain. As I continued to search, the sounds of the party seemed to grow louder and more boisterous, making it even more difficult to focus on my search. As I was searching the different rooms in the house, I eventually made my way up to the first floor. Upon my arrival, I noticed that the entire floor appeared to be empty. It was just about to leave when I suddenly heard a strange moaning sound emanating from one of the adjacent rooms. My stomach sank as a feeling of dread washed over me, and I slowly approached to investigate further. As I peered inside the room, my heart sank even further as I came to realize that my worst fears had been realized. In front of me, I saw my beloved girlfriend eloping with another man. The air in the room grew thick with tension as I stood there in shock, unable to fully process what I was seeing. Anger filled my heart by the betrayal of my girlfriend, whom I trusted the most. It was a moment that would stay with me forever, haunting me with the memory of what I had seen. I stomped inside and I grabbed the man by the back of the shirt and pulled him up. He was caught off guard, probably because he wasn't expecting anyone to arrive. I left my cheating girlfriend alone and flabbergasted while I decided to deal with the man first. What was even more shocking was when the man started asking me who I was while claiming my girlfriend to be his. He seemed to have no clue either that she was two-timing us, but by the time we realized that we had already bashed each other up, so she took advantage of the situation and fled. As soon as the man I caught with my girlfriend exited the room, I found myself standing there, dazed and unsure of what to do. My heart pounded furiously against my chest as a wave of betrayal washed over me. I stood there for a few minutes, trying to come up with a plan of action. Eventually, it dawned on me. I needed to confront her and question. I had to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. My mind was filled with a burning rage as I frantically searched for my girlfriend, scanning every corner of the party. But she was nowhere to be found. It wasn't until I overheard one of my friends mention that she had seen my girlfriend heading up to the rooftop that I knew where to go. My heart pounding with anger, I stormed toward the rooftop, determined to confront her and get answers. I needed to know why she was playing with my heart like that. As I pushed open the door to the rooftop, my eyes fell upon her trembling figure. She looked so small and fragile, but I knew better now. She was a siren, luring me in with her innocent doe eyes. She was standing near the railing, and as I was walking closer, she warned me not to approach. My heart was already racing with fear as I demanded to know why she cheated on me. But she didn't reply, instead biting her lower lip as she tried to avoid my gaze. With a sudden burst of energy, I rapidly closed the distance between us, catching her off guard. She attempted to evade me, but in doing so, she lost her balance and tumbled off the railing. My instinct was to catch her and prevent the fall, but for an inexplicable moment, I hesitated before frantically reaching out to grasp her hands. But as fate would have it, my hesitation proved costly, as I was unable to catch her in time. Luckily, there were people around who rushed to her aid and called an ambulance. She was rushed to the emergency room in critical condition. I know I should have gone after her, but after what she did to me, I couldn't forgive her and act like I wasn't hurt. I wasn't hurt physically like her, and you can say I lacked humanity, and even if I did, I don't regret it. I don't know when she recovered, or even if she recovered from her fall. I don't know, perhaps she died. I never visited her in the hospital or contacted her after that day. Instead, I booked a hotel room and stayed the night there. The next day, I booked a flight home and deleted all traces of her from my life. It's a harsh reality, but sometimes we need to prioritize our own mental health and well-being. While it may seem selfish, it's important to remember that I can't pour from an empty cup. I may have to move on, but the memory of her actions will be stuck with me forever.
Back in 2004, me and the wife decided we couldn't face freezing our bits off for yet another British winter, and started looking for a more tropical location to spend the festive period. We were working on a bit of a budget and couldn't quite afford the Thai or Vietnamese beaches we'd had our hearts set on. But after a little bit of searching, we came across this lovely little beachside bed and breakfast in a little town called Galle on the southwestern coast of Sri Lanka. It was definitely priced a budget hotel, but the photos the owners had taken showed it to be quaint, clean, and beautiful little place. And once my wife was taken with it, I had very little choice in the matter. So I made a booking. The food was amazing. The people were welcoming, and the beaches were everything we could have hoped for. Come Christmas Day, we had the most unusual Christmas dinner of our lives, sharing a veritable banquet of different dolls and curries in a local restaurant. And it was so good that neither of us missed pigs and blankets that year. And I'm sure most of you will agree that's really saying something. We finished off with a few drinks on the beach, stuffing every so often to giggle at how surreal it all was. Then we were sunbathing on Christmas Day. Then, once we were drowsy enough, we headed off to bed for an early night. The next morning was even better. No hangovers, no dodgy leftovers to work through, no going down the local park in the freezing cold to pretend that a brisk Boxing Day walk is anything but an absolute bullock. Just sun, seas, sandy beaches for 5 more days. Me and the wife replaced the horrid Boxing Day park walk with drinks and nibbles in the beachside cafe, nibbling on dips and papadums, wondering how we were going to readjust to life back in the UK again. I mean, it had been literal paradise for almost a full fortnight. We could have never have possibly guessed in that moment. Then, our festive little Asian trip would turn out to be the biggest mistake of our lives. But we soon learned that a dream day can turn into a living nightmare in just a matter of minutes. So we're just sitting there in the open-air restaurant, holding hands, both enjoying that lovely rhythmic sound of the waves gently breaking against the beach. And suddenly, it stopped. We heard that big rush as the water was pulled back away from the shore. But no crash followed. And me and my wife watched as the water crept further and further back away from the shore. And I don't mean like a few feet or anything. It just kept going and going until you could barely see the edge anymore. And there was only wet sands as far as the eye could see. I distinctly remember the moment I saw these tiny specks on the wet sand in the distance. And now it almost looked like they were jumping up and down. Only that's exactly what they were doing. They were fish that had been swimming in the shallows when the water had just disappeared. Now they were flapping around in the sand, gasping for breath. I turned to see the young waitress standing behind us. I'm about to ask her what was happening, but her face told me all I needed to know. She was golfing even harder than we were and had obviously never seen anything like it in her life. The next thing I know, There are people running out onto the wet sand with plastic bags, scooping up the fish into them before moving on to the next port flounder. It was actually quite amusing for a moment, thinking it must have been the easiest morning's fishing that any of them had ever experienced. But the next moment, I hear this absolute roar of a shout coming from down the beach. An older man was bellowing something out to the lad scooping up fish. Then he turns and starts shouting with his hands kept around his mouth, like he's trying to announce something to everyone. I turned around to the Sri Lankan waitress to ask what was being said, but by that time, her dad showed up, the cafe owner I later found out, and he has this horrified look on his face. I could tell he was looking out to sea, so I turned to see what he was looking at, and that's when I saw that the water was starting to come back in. Only it wasn't returning as gently as it had rescinded. It was getting faster and faster, and the way he was getting bigger and bigger. "Sir, madam, please come upstairs," I remember the owner saying. Suddenly, there was a big wave coming. A very big wave. "We must all go upstairs now. Very fast, please." The cafe was basically a big hollowed-out concrete block, so I was confident that we would indeed be safe if we went upstairs where there was another open-air dining area. The only trouble was getting everyone up there, as the owner's elderly mother was confined to a wheelchair. I didn't actually see her at first. She was in another room when we all started to move, so I was halfway up the stairs by the time I saw the owner wheeling her to the bottom. It was honestly one of the most horrifying moments in my life. This horrendous "oh no" moment, because the guy was trying to pull her up the stairs backwards in the wheelchair, but he clearly didn't have the strength to do it on his own. I basically pushed my wife up the stairs and then forced my way back down them towards where the owner was struggling with his mom. I grabbed one handle and he grabbed the other, but that wasn't working. So we tried actually carrying the whole thing by grabbing the wheel spokes, but again, that wasn't working. The whole time, I could hear the wave getting closer and closer. My poor wife from the top floor saying, oh my God," as it's getting nearer to break. Then it struck. We didn't have the owner's mom up as high as we needed, and all this water and debris came crashing over us. It was pure chaos for a second. I was grabbing onto the banister, into someone's arm or leg. I couldn't tell who was just holding on for dear life. All of a sudden, the water level drops a bit, but it's still rushing past us. This lets me see that I've got hold of the owner's arm while he has hold of his mother's hands. The wheelchair was nowhere to be seen. Like it was there one moment, gone. The next just dragged away by what turned out to be a 15-foot-high tsunami. I'm sorry if my reading starts to take a turn at this point. Remember, all of this is really, really painful, and I'm sure you understand why in just a moment. So I'm pulling with all my might, trying to keep the owner and by proxy his mom from being washed away. That was just too heavy for me to drag out of the water. And I'm actually struggling to hold on to myself. So I'm absolutely terrified that I'm going to lose grip, which not only do I die, but they die too. I can't even express how ashamed I am to say this, but there was a moment when I thought about just letting go. I know that sounds absolutely soulless, but the kind of terror I felt at that moment, I'd never experienced anything like it in my life. It was like something else just took over for a moment. Screw everyone, but my kind of attitude that placed my life above all else. But even in that moment, I knew I wouldn't be able to live with myself. It just seemed out of the question. If I lose grip on them, if they get ripped away from me, that's different. But for me to just let go seemed a bit too much like murder for me to go through with it. Next thing, I'm snapped out of that horrible moment by screaming from the owner and his mom. They're saying things to each other in their language, so I don't have a clue what they're saying. I thought I could pretty much guess that. They'd be saying, "Don't let go. I don't want to die. I won't let you go, Mom." Stuff like that, but then I'm choking up as I write this. The owner suddenly let go of his mom's hand, and that she might have slipped or something. But the way he turned so purposefully and ran back up the stairs, I knew that he just let her go. I was stunned, absolutely stunned. But as I said, I'm just in survival mode. So I'm following him up the stairs to the safety of the top floor. I feel my wife bear hug me with this full body impact before she burst into tears. It hadn't occurred to me, but because she hadn't been able to see what I was doing, she thought I had been washed away. She's crying and screaming at me, "Where did you go?" I swear I wanted to tell her, but I just couldn't. Instead, I looked over the edge of the open-top dining area, and I just gasped at the utter destruction below us. The entire landscape had been completely transformed. It was almost unrecognizable, and the water just kept going and going inland, never slowing down, never stopping. I remember the moment I realized that could have been happening to the entire island. Just miles and miles of coastline, completely and utterly destroyed in just a few minutes. Although it was bad enough when the water was coming in, it was even worse as the tide dragged it back out again, because all the death and destruction that was caused bulldozing its way inland, it was pulled back past us as the water returned to the ocean. There were so many bodies. I lost count. Every other second, you'd see a patch of pink or brown flesh floating on the surface, maybe a streak of color from someone's clothing. There were so many dead. Someone who just didn't see it coming. But the hardest part for me to bear was yet to come. When the majority of the danger had passed, and it was just stagnant water on the floor below us, the owner and one of his sons ventured downstairs to bring up what little food and what otter they could salvage from the flooded kitchen. We knew rescue wouldn't be quick, and people already working their way through the mess outside, pulling out dead bodies and survivors, like me and my wife pitched in as best we could. But the fact remains that there just wasn't much we could do at that stage, other than try to comfort the handful of people with us Sri Lankans included the night. None of us could sleep, even with the free beer that the owner had given us. So when I saw him smoking a cigarette in the darkness on his own, I thought I might give him a bit of company. I hadn't smoked since I first tried in sixth form college, but the night I asked him for a smoke, and we shared a beer in a second silence. Then, out of nowhere, he says, "I didn't want to let her go." I didn't even really know what to say to that. I know he was referring to his mom, but I didn't know if he was just trying to rationalize it or what. So I just nodded. I told him, I know. But he shook his head. He goes on to tell me that his mom had told him to let her go. She knew I couldn't pull them both in. She also knew that it wouldn't be long before we'd all be dragged off. So she sacrificed herself for us. The owner told me what their little exchange had been, and I swear to God, it almost broke me. He said it went something like this. "Let me go, son. Let me go. "No, Mom, you'll drown." "You don't let me go, wild trout. Just hold on. I've had a long life. I've had a good life. You've been a good son, and you made me very proud. But your family, your needs to take care of Deuce. I tell you, I love you, Mom. I love you too. Goodbye." He said he couldn't bring himself to say goodbye. So he just let her go. Turned and went to look after his family, just like his mama told him to. This all happened nearly 16 years ago, and I still can't talk or think about it without tearing up. I can't even imagine being in that situation. And just knowing it happened was completely traumatizing. So God only knows how he actually dealt with it himself. I think that's why this has been so helpful to type up. I can't really talk to anyone about what happened that day. People beside the wife anyway. Either get frustrated that they don't understand, or if they ask too many questions, or worst case scenario, I start thinking about the owner's mom. I choke up, and then there's no more talking at all. So rather than suffering the embarrassment of being a grown man in tears, I just shut my mouth and tried to deal with it. But I don't really think there is anything to deal with. I think to an extent that trauma just becomes a part of you. It doesn't hurt anyone. It's not debilitating, but it's always there. Like the scar left after a deep wound. You just learn to live with it.
My name is Cindy. I'm working as a somnologist in a small hospital in California. This morning, I came to the clinic with a disturbed mind. When my assistant, whose name is Roger Pears, asked me the reason, I simply just said it's because of the sleep demons. As if anyone's going to believe you. You know better than anyone, Cindy, that demons don't exist. There's a simple scientific explanation for what's experienced. Roger replied in a way that convinced me, despite knowing that I'm an expert in this field. Come on, Roger, don't try to make it sound like I'm uttering some nonsense. Besides, I haven't even told you the entire truth for me saying that sleep paralysis demons might exist, I said as I sat down on my chair. Because it does sound like that, the way you're talking about it. One might think you encountered one of them overnight. He looked at me laughing as he said that. But the moment he analyzed my expression, he stopped and asked hesitantly, "Don't tell me, did you?" As I looked directly into his eyes without uttering a word, he thought I was pulling a prank on him. So he looked around everywhere to check if there was any hidden cameras. When he didn't find any, he asked me to tell him everything. It was just about last night when I was preparing for sleeping. I was studying a case that was recently assigned to me. I needed some research material, so I searched it online when I came across an article about sleep paralysis demons, which was claiming that sleep paralysis occurs due to demons. They can be in the form of aliens or dead relatives. Thinking that it was a bunch of nonsense, I didn't read it any further and closed the website. After that, I pulled my phone on the side table, changed into sleepwear, and went to bed. I often have a hard time falling asleep, so I have to take sleeping pills. But that night, for some strange reason, pills weren't required, and I fell asleep as soon as I closed my eyes. Even though I was sleeping, I can recall that I was having a disturbing nightmare that I can't remember at the moment. These vaguely dreamlike experiences were not uncommon to me. Instead, I've become used to having these kinds of experiences during my sleep, even after taking the pills. Just must be thinking that even though I am a sleep expert myself, I am suffering for all this. And yes, I am suffering from insomnia despite being a somnologist. And it's been a while. I always try to hide my condition from others because I'm unable to treat myself, but sometimes my condition suffocates me. I can still recall that I was sweating from the nightmare so much that my entire body was wet, even though the air conditioner was working just fine. This time it felt different from all the other nightmares that I had. The feeling was as if I was about to die from asphyxiation, so I subconsciously tried to wake myself, but it wasn't working. I slowly started to get aware of my surroundings, but my body wasn't giving any response. By the time I had the realization that the symptoms I've experienced were sleep paralysis, I could hear the clock making a tick, tick, and tick sound vividly. There was another faint dripping sound. Guessed the bathroom tap must be leaking. At that exact moment, I heard another strange sound that sounded like someone's footsteps that kept getting louder and louder as time went, as well as the level of my suffocation, which was unbearable. While these traumatizing turn of events were happening, I continued to struggle just to wake up. Suddenly, the atmosphere became dark, and there was a sinister aura that started surrounding me. I was so horrified that I could feel the sweat running through my body like water, and even though my body wasn't moving, I was feeling as if I was shaking like a leaf. The eerie atmosphere getting darker and darker, and that was when a shadow-like image appeared in front of my eyes. This faceless, shapeless presence reached onto me, grabbed my throat, and started to strangle me. The air became dense. I started gasping. It was not just the shortness of breath that was terrifying me, but the awareness of this monster who was there to take me. My eyes started to roll backwards. That was when I knew that this was my last moment. But I wasn't ready just yet. The next thing I knew, I saw the ceiling and heard myself catching my breath. I tried moving my body, and it moved. So I jolted up and looked around to check if the monster was still around. I was feeling like a scared kid who came out of a horror movie. So I ran to the bathroom and washed my face multiple times, and each time I looked into the mirror to see my reflection in assurance to see if it was real. I was so freaked out that I was still unable to believe that I just went through, because it all felt too real to be a nightmare. As I was trying to grasp at the situation, I noticed the dripping sound. I turned around following the sound. I saw little droplets of water coming from the shower. Immediately, I rushed to close it tightly. Even though I was convinced that the shadow monster might not be real, I just couldn't feel this terrifying feeling in my mind. That was when I remembered the article that I read right before sleeping. So I picked up my phone from the side table and immediately opened that article about the sleep paralysis demon. This was the first time that I had ever been through an actual sleep paralysis myself, and even though a few patients had described it as a feeling something demonic, I never believed them, saying it must be some nightmare. That was the reason why I started reading this article again. I knew that what I just experienced was a hypnopomonic hallucination, so the demon was not real. But there was something in the back of my mind that kept telling me what I saw was not a lie either. And as I was thinking that, my gaze went to a line in the article where there was a name written of that demon, Pisadira. My name is George Colton. I'm 26 years old, and I work with Fashion Magazine Company in New Jersey. You can say that I was a child prodigy or something, because I completed my graduation at the age of 19. I was always focused on my studies, so I never got the time or a chance to ever date. I never even had a crush on a girl. No, I'm not gay. It's just, I never came across a girl who would pique my interest in dating or a relationship, except for her. But looking at what happened, I don't think we can count her as my love interest. There is something that I witnessed a few years back which completely freaked me out. I have realized by now that if you strongly don't believe in something, you always end up experiencing something which completely shatters your belief. Something similar happened to me a few years back. I've always been a working man since the completion of my education. After graduation and internship, I immediately landed a high-paying job in one of the best companies. You know, most people complain about workload and nasty work environment. It was never the case for me with this job. My boss was one of the most admirable women I have known. I loved working at that place, and I enjoyed my work as well. Everything was well and good, except for the fact that I worked on night shifts. Staying awake at night is one of the hardest things to do if you are working or studying, and my work required both. I was in the research department, so sleepiness was always lingering over me. It was around the time when I was a newbie in the office and knew absolutely nothing about the surroundings of that place. One night when I was reading some research materials related to an upcoming event that was supposed to be published within 2 days, I was feeling extremely sleepy. It was not like I did not take enough sleep during the day. Well, it was partially the case, but the main reason was this employee who was constantly boring me through his nonsense stories. "Hey George, I'm feeling sleepy, so do you want to come with me to Starbucks?" I guess Amelia took notice of my condition. That must be why she asked. But I never knew there was a Starbucks around our company. "Yes, please," I replied with an exhausted voice, which made her laugh, and I got to go with her. Our department was on the top 5th floor of the building, so we often used to take the elevator. But that day, the elevator was broken, and we went through the stairs to the basement. As I was about to take out the car, Amelia told me that there won't be a need for this because the Starbucks was just on the back side of the building. We walked to the outlet, and as we were entering, I noticed a girl who was wearing the Starbucks employee uniform, and she was sitting on one of the corner chairs. She was leaning her head over to the wall and was looking somewhere in a daze. I couldn't take my eyes off her. I mean, who would be able to? She was the definition of natural beauty. Her hair was tied in a messy bun. Her body was carved into a shape that looked defined even in her uniform, and her long, thick lashes were visible through the distance I was looking at her from. She blinked, and her gaze met mine, and I immediately looked away. Amelia asked me what coffee I wanted and went to order it. I sneakily looked at her, and she was lost again in her thoughts. During the entire time Amelia and I were there drinking coffee, she was sitting in the same spot and did not move an inch. I wanted to talk to her and stay there for longer, but I couldn't because I had to return to the office to finish my work. So I left with Amelia. As we were climbing up the stairs, Amelia was telling me something the entire time, but I was not listening because I just couldn't focus on her voice at all. And that wasn't all. I could not let myself completely focus on work either, because that was the first time in my life when I made a mistake while doing something. I was panicking about it because I realized this after submitting the final draft. The boss called me in and told me about the mistake, but instead of being angry at me, she told me to relax and that it was okay to make mistakes sometimes. The next day, I went to Starbucks again for coffee with Amelia and another colleague, and noticed that the girl was sitting at the same spot. She was lost in some thoughts again and was staring blankly into nowhere. It felt a bit weird, but I thought she may have some kind of stress or something. I found her at the same spot in the same position the next day after that, and the next to the next day after as well. So I figured that it must be her break time or something, but noticed that she was the only one taking a break and no one else took notice of her either. I was curious to know why she looked so sad and lost, so one day I decided to ask her, "Excuse me, I couldn't help but notice you. Do you mind if I ask what troubles you, miss?" After walking to her, I asked her. She turned her face toward me and stared at me with a blank expression on her face. That was when someone tapped me on the shoulder, and I turned. "Whom are you talking to alone?" It was Amelia. She asked me while laughing. I pointed to the girl and turned to see her, but no one was there. I thought she may have left. You know what? I'm always the one ordering. You order the coffees today. She pushed me toward the counter while saying that. When I went there, I saw there was a picture of the Employee of the Year, and the year that was written on that was 2 years back from that day. So I asked one of the employees about her. What he told me surprised me and freaked me out at the same time. He said that she used to work here and was one of the best employees, but about a year ago, she committed suicide because of severe depression. He told me she was harassed by someone, and that person got her pregnant. She never told who it was, and often used to sit there staring blankly after her child was aborted. And one day, she committed suicide. I looked toward Amelia, who was looking at me with a smile without a clue. I took the coffee and walked towards her. Before leaving Starbucks, I looked in the direction where I used to see her, once again, but the chair was still empty.
Hello? Yeah, Mom, I just got here. Yeah, don't worry. I booked an Uber. Okay. Don't worry. I'll share my live location. As soon as I landed in Ohio to visit my grandparents, my mother called me all worried because it was the first time that I was traveling alone. I mean, come on, Mom needs to take it easy. I know it's my first time traveling to another state, but I used to travel alone in my hometown all the time. So as I told my mom I had already booked myself a ride that was supposed to be there any minute, I checked again on the Uber app and it said, "Sorry, your ride might be delayed due to some inconvenience from our side." I checked the time and it was 11:49 p.m. I thought it would be best to wait till the ride arrived, so I sat down on an empty bench in front of the airport. As I was waiting for the Uber, I noticed two drunk guys passing by and turning over in my direction. I got scared by the thought of them molesting me, so I immediately got up and started walking in the opposite direction. At the same time, I saw the Uber car stop in front of me. I double checked and it was my ride, so I immediately got in. "Are you okay, ma'am?" The driver noticed me all panicked, so he asked. "Yes, I'm fine, don't worry, just drive me to the destination, please." I replied with a bit of a cold tone, which he sensed and started driving. The rest of the ride he was completely silent. There was something that I noticed in his car, and it was the faint smell of blood. How did I notice this even though it was faint? Well, I work in a hospital as a nurse, so I come across blood all the time. That's how I easily recognized it. It felt a bit creepy and weird to me, so I kept thinking about all the possibilities of the blood spilling in his car. There was this possibility that he may have gotten hurt or met an accident while driving, or he was a serial killer who could have killed someone in the car. As I was thinking all this, the car stopped and the driver told me that we have reached our destination. I absentmindedly got off and walked into my grandparents' house. He drove off and I thought that it must be my imagination because working in a hospital and always being around blood had made my nose sensitive. I thought of calling my mom and informing her about my arrival, but then I realized that my purse was missing. Even after looking for it through everything, my stuff and all, I could not find it. Now, there was only one possibility that I left my purse inside the cab, and I had no way to contact the driver because I remember putting my phone inside my purse when I was getting in the car, and the driver's details were inside the car as well. It was not just my phone that was inside the car, my credit cards, my passport, and my other identification cards, every important stuff that was in that purse. My grandfather told me that he would try to do something about it and left. Well, my grandmother asked me not to worry and presented side dishes and sweets for me to eat. I had no appetite left to eat anything, but I still ate some, just so that she would not feel bad. Since I did not know much about the town, I had no other choice but to wait for Grandpa to come back. He returned around 4 in the evening and told me that he had reported the police about it, and that they would find it. I knew deep down that it would be no use, and started thinking that I should just forget about my things. I informed Mom about my arrival and my purse being missing, to Grandpa's phone, for which she scolded me to her heart's content. Grandma cooked a nice dinner for us that night, chicken and everything. I thought my purse was gone anyway, so why should I miss out on Grandma's cooking? I ate till my belly started to feel tighten, Trust me, Grandma's cooking is the best, which I could eat without limits. After dinner, she brought dessert, and then I had that. After eating, she guided me upstairs to a room that had an outside view. I opened the window, looked outside, and noticed a car parked in front of Grandma's house. A man was standing outside the car and looking in the direction of our house. I instantly recognized him, and he was the Uber driver. I immediately ran out while Grandma followed me. As I reached the driver, took out a bag and handed it to me. As I was thanking him, I realized the smell of blood was stronger than before. I know I shouldn't think of such a thing at a moment like this, but I still couldn't avoid it. I was thankful for the driver's honesty and the fact that he came back to return my purse to me. The next day, I was playing with Aunt Fry's daughter, and my grandparents were watching the news. Grandma called me to show me something. I walked there and looked in the direction of the television where she pointed a finger. The news was broadcasting about an Uber driver going off and killing rapists. I recognized him by the picture. I finally understood the reason behind the blood smell in his car. He was arrested and the investigation was going on. So we followed and continued watching the news for the next few days. It was revealed that he was a single father of a 7-year-old beautiful daughter and earned a living by driving for Uber. One day when he had left his daughter with a nanny and was at work, the nanny along with her daughter were gang raped and murdered. When he returned, he found a very disturbing sight of their bodies, which made him tremble and angry to his core. He reported the case to the police, but the police were unable to find the culprits behind the crime. So he decided to take the matters into his own hands and went on a killing spree against the rapists. He'd killed more than 8 people who had raped infants, young women, and elderly ladies. I saw the final news before my departure from my grandparents' house. He was being held on trial and that the murder of his daughter and the nanny were being investigated. One thought that crossed my mind, even though it is not right by law, was, I wish more people like him emerge and kill the inhumane beings and monsters of our lives.
As I slowly opened my eyes, I was surprised to find myself in a strange, unfamiliar bed. I quickly checked myself to make sure I was fully clothed and took a sigh of relief that I was. I noticed my bag sitting on the side table, so I checked it too to see if everything was in there, and luckily nothing was missing. As I opened my phone to see my current location, I was taken aback that I was in Barcelona. How in the world did I end up there? I wondered, trying to recollect the events of the previous night, but to no avail. That was when the door creaked open, and a tall, tanned, lean yet muscular man entered the room with a tray containing breakfast. I didn't know him, so I was cautious as he approached me. He opened his mouth and said good morning in a husky voice before asking me if I was okay. I nodded my head hesitantly and asked how I was there. "Oh, I found you passed out on the street. I tried asking you where you lived, but since you couldn't talk and it wasn't safe leaving you there, I brought you to my home. But don't worry, I didn't do anything to you." He placed the tray on the table while saying that. A sense of relief washed over me upon hearing that, but what was weirder was that I did not remember drinking yesterday in the bar. I only had soft drinks, so it was strange that I passed out. Did someone spike my drink? The question lingered in my mind as I got from the bed and began preparing to leave the man's house. My head was throbbing as I gathered my belongings and asked him to show me the exit after thanking him. He didn't say much and simply led to the door. As I safely left his house, the doubt about that man being a pervert or someone dangerous lifted from my mind. However, I still wonder who it could be that spiked my drink and why. On my way home, I couldn't help but feel unprepared and a little downhearted that I hadn't done much to prepare for Christmas this year. With only 2 days left until the big day, I decided to take action and headed to Walmart to shop for some decorations and other festive items. I wanted to ensure that Christmas wouldn't be a bland and uneventful occasion for me, so I took my time browsing through the aisles, picking out the perfect decorations and all. It was important for me to make the most of the holiday season and not spend Christmas Eve sulking on my couch, drinking alone. As I was browsing the aisles of the store, searching for the items on my list, I suddenly felt a prickling sensation at the back of my neck. I turned around to see if anyone was staring at me, but that crowded store made it impossible to identify the culprit. Despite my unease, I continued to browse, hoping that the feeling would pass. However, as I made my way towards the checkout counter, I realized that the gaze was still following me. It made me feel uncomfortable and self-conscious, as if I was being judged by a stranger. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it lingered until I finally paid for my purchases and left the store. As I made my way back home from Walmart, I couldn't shake off the feeling that someone was watching me. It started as a faint sense of unease, but soon became full-blown paranoia that I was being followed. I quickened my pace, but the footsteps behind me seemed to match mine. Every time I turned around, there was no one there, but the feeling persisted. The closer I got to my apartment building, the more I felt like I was being stalked. I was on the edge as I fumbled my keys to unlock the front door, but as soon as I slipped inside the building, the feeling lifted. I breathed a sigh of relief that whoever it was that had followed me in, as the thought of them getting to my apartment filled me with dread. As soon as I entered my apartment, I felt a sense of relief. However, I was still paranoid, and my heart was racing. I quickly went to the bedroom and peeked through the window to see if the stalker was still outside. I was hoping to catch a glimpse of the person who was following me. But to my disappointment, there was no one there. I couldn't shake off the feeling that someone was out there waiting for the chance to attack me. I wondered if I was just being paranoid, and it was all just my mind playing tricks on me. But for some reason, deep down, I knew that my fears were not unfounded. I had no clue who spiked my drink at the bar, but I had a hunch that whoever was following me had something to do with it. My mind was racing with thoughts and questions. Who was this person following me? Why were they doing it? What did they want from me? I was scared, but I knew I had to be vigilant and stay alert. I couldn't let my guard down. On the day after I had put the Christmas decorations in my house, I realized that I had forgotten to purchase the snacks for the occasion. Although the thought of running into the stalker made me nervous, I decided to gather my courage and fetch my car keys. I stepped outside and carefully scanned my surroundings before making my way to the car. I was relieved when I saw no one following me, and so I hurriedly drove to Walmart. As I reached the entrance of the store, a strange sensation formed in the pit of my stomach. Just then, I felt a tap on my shoulder, causing me to jump in alarm. I turned around to see the man I was in the apartment of the day before standing behind me with a smile on his face. While I was grateful for his help, there was something about his presence that made me feel uneasy. Despite my apprehension, I tried to be polite and acknowledge him. "What a coincidence! Do you live around here?" he asked in a curious tone. But I didn't want to give him my address, so I simply nodded and excused myself before heading inside the store. However, he followed me inside, making me feel uneasy and following me to whatever aisle I went. It was weird enough that he was all the way here to shop from Barcelona, but putting up with him like that was nerve-wracking. After finally managing to shake him off, I paid for my purchases and made my way back home. However, as I turned toward the narrow road that led to my apartment building, I found a car blocking my way. I honked repeatedly, but the driver didn't budge, so I decided to get out of my car and approach the vehicle. I opened the car door and walked to the car's window before knocking on it. As the mirror was pulled down, I was shocked to see the man from before. He handed me a package saying it was for me, but what was scarier was that I never told him where I live. "How did you—" I stuttered those words, and I started backing off. I was about to run back to my car, but everything happened so fast. He got out with a flash and put a damp cloth over my nose. His words before I blacked out were blurred, but I could hear it. "It was fun seeing you so terrified." My name is Monique Silva. I work in a California Sheriff's Department as a dispatcher. It was about 3 months ago when I received one of the most shocking and disturbing calls of my entire career. I was on night duty on that Thursday night when the call came around in the night. I answered the call in the same professional manner I had always done before, only to hear the voice of none other than an 8-year-old boy on the other end. 911, what's your emergency? I asked. My parents, they are bleeding on the floor. Someone killed them, he said in a terrified, fear-saturated voice. Being a single mother of 6-year-old boys myself, his voice broke my heart. I immediately dispatched a team to the location he was at and tried to calm him down. Can you explain to me the situation a bit clearly? I asked in a calm, professional voice, despite being a little disturbed by the child's terrified screams in my head. I was sleeping. When I woke up, I was standing in front of my mom and dad's bodies. His voice trembled as he said this, along with the hiccups of his cries. Please remain calm. You're going to be all right. The police are on their way. My voice seemed as shallow as a pan when I said that. According to the boy, their parents were on the living room floor and the carpet was soaked in blood, whereas the boy was sitting near a corner, crying and sobbing. Upon entry into the house, police officers found the 2 dead bodies exactly where the boy said it was, on the floor of the living room. The woman seemed like she was 6 months pregnant, and by the looks of it, they seemed as if they had been stabbed in the back. A knife soaked in blood was found under the couch. There were footprints of the boy all over the blood on the floor, which seemed to have been made when the boy found the bodies. At first, it appeared to be a tragic but typical case of theft that had unfortunately ended in the murder of the couple found on the floor. But upon searching for evidence, there seemed to be no signs or fingerprints of someone else being present in the house besides the 8-year-old boy and the couple who were murdered. They also questioned the neighbors, but none of them had heard or seen anything suspicious around the house. One neighbor told officers that the last thing he heard was the crying of the boy who was getting beaten and scolded by the father late into the night when he was passing by their house. I know it was wrong to suspect a horrified and traumatized 8-year-old child of killing his parents, but all the evidence was pointing in his direction. Forensics examiners found only the boy's fingerprints on the murder weapon and the body of his parents. It was assumed that the father was sleeping on the couch when the boy first stabbed him in the back of his neck. He didn't die on the spot. Instead, he tried to get up and walk away, but fell on the floor. After that, his mother may have come to check what the noises were about, and when she did, he somehow managed to kill his pregnant mother by stabbing her multiple times in the same spot as she was checking on her husband. This story was just a theory that investigators came up with upon suspecting the child of murder, but before concluding, they investigated every possible person who might be a possible suspect of the crime when the motive to kill the couple. Even if the boy had killed them, it was clear that he had no reconciliation of ever doing that, looking at how he was constantly crying with the trauma he had conceived. Either that, or this 8-year-old had somehow mastered the art of lying to the extent that it looked like he had no memory of killing his parents. By further investigation into the child's history, it was revealed that he was not the biological son of Mr. Branson. He found out that his wife was cheating on him before conceiving Finn with her boss when he was 2 years old. Even though he forgave his wife, he could never forget Finn and started mistreating and roughing him up from then. Being guilty of infidelity, Finn's mother turned a blind eye to the ill treatment that her son was receiving. As a result, Finn developed dissociative identity disorder at the age of 5 to cope with everything that was happening to him. The diagnosis was made after questioning Finn about the times when he remembered blacking out, which he thought he used to fall asleep during that period. His parents and neighbors thought of his second violent personality as him rebelling against his parents and becoming negligent toward him. On the same day of the murder, Mr. Branson was called to Finn's school as he had beaten a kid, but upon asking, he refused to do that. And after the school meeting, he went back to his office. When Finn was questioned if he remembered harming his parents, he refused ever doing that. The only thing that Finn remembered before the murder was that, but when he came back to the house after work around 10 in the night, he started beating up the kid. Guessing by the way he was bullied by his father and ignored by his mother, his other personality may have surfaced and killed them. All the other evidence that was found made it clear that it was indeed the boy who murdered them, so he was sent to a rehabilitation center. He's currently getting treatment there, but his ill treatment to vent his anger toward a mere child, Mr. Branson not only gave the poor boy a never-healing scar and trauma, but also made him a murderer of himself, his wife, and his conceived baby. Working in the field for several years, I had come across many unusual and disturbing cases, but this one case was the most unusual among and disturbing among all of them.
Ocampo was born on March 28, 1988 in Mexico City. Itzcoatl Ocampo was the oldest son of two Mexican immigrants who eventually came to Seattle in the Orange County suburb of Yorba Linda, California. After spending the first 12 years of his life in the state, his parents gained American citizenship for both of them and their children. And Itzcoatl, who would go on to graduate from Anaheim Esperanza High School in the summer of 2006. His high school friends would later remember Ocampo as a warm and friendly young man, and it was this demeanor that won him many friends during his education. But something happened during his school years that had a profound effect on Ocampo. The attack on New York's Twin Towers in September of 2001. Following what proved to be one of the most devastating terrorist attacks in world history, Ocampo's friends noticed a distinct shift in his personality. He became dark and brooding, fostering an intense interest in the politics of the Republican Party, and particularly the foreign policies of then President George W. Bush. It was also around this time that Ocampo became a victim of a rather intense campaign of bullying by what his friends later described as a bunch of rich jocks. Whether or not this affected his decision to join the U.S. Marines is unclear, but we know that as of July 2006, he was stationed at Camp Pendleton and Oceanside, where he was attached to the 15th Regiment of the Medical and Sanitary Battalion. In 2008, Ocampo was deployed to Iraq with the 1st Supply Battalion to Iraq, but it's evident that he didn't see combat during his 8 months in country. His job was to transport water and fuel the combat soldiers deeper in the field. And although he certainly faced all the dangers presented by an act of insurgency, Ocampo was never actually under fire at any point. We also know that at some point during his tour, there was an incident in which Ocampo pointed a loaded weapon at an Allied soldier. Although it's not clear which nationality the soldier was, Ocampo was severely punished for his indiscretion. He was demoted, docked pay, and assigned extra work duties as penance. Despite this worrying episode, Ocampo still received all the appropriate commendations of his tour, including the Iraq Campaign Medal, Global War on Terrorism Service Medal, and the National Defense Service Medal. His superiors apparently viewed his outbursts as an unfortunate but unavoidable part of serving in an active war zone. Ocampo was stressed he acted out, but he didn't hurt anyone, and he took his punishment like a man. And it seems his later behavior is better explained by an event which occurred back in the States. After returning to Camp Pendleton, Ocampo experienced a traumatic brain injury. When the latch on his 7-ton failed to lock and slammed into the back of his head, he was medically discharged at the worst possible time. Rent as the U.S. was falling into a recession, Ocampo struggled to find work, eventually settling for low-paid work as a landscaper. All the while, his life fell apart around him. He discovered that his father was addicted to drugs, causing Ocampo's mother to divorce him. They also lost the house as a result of this addiction, and the pain this must have caused Itzcoatl is frankly immeasurable. Around July 2010, Ocampo began to show signs of complex PTSD. First noted when he began an exhibit what he might call deviant behavior. A serious factor for the deterioration of his mental state was the death of his close friend Pitino, who died in Afghanistan's Helmand province during combat in the summer of 2010. Following his death, its coastal became depressed and increasingly dependent on alcohol. Over the next 2 years, unable to adapt to a normal life and hold a job, he depended on income from relatives and refused treatment from psychiatrists, and insisted he was unqualified to be diagnosed for PTSD because he did not fight in combat. By the end of 2011, his mental state had deteriorated sharply to the point of developing hypochondria and showing signs of clinical delirium. Then, on October 25th of 2011, Ocampo suddenly appeared on the doorstep of his old high school classmate, 24-year-old Adair Herrera. Adair lived with his 53-year-old mother, Raquel, along with his older brother, Juan, and both were present when Ocampo unexpectedly lunged at them, stabbing both Rockhill and Juan more than 30 times. The Herreros' neighbors witnessed the murders, providing police with a description of the offender's appearance and his clothing. But because their Adair no combo were similar in appearance, the grieving Adair was arrested in the shocking display of police negligence. Despite denying any involvements in the deaths of his mother and brother, he was still considered the main suspect when it was revealed that shortly before the crime, he had gotten into some kind of verbal altercation with them, as per a statement from their neighbors. Just short of 2 months later, on the evening of December 21st, Ocampo was loitering about in the parking lot of a shopping center in Bloc Cassia when he suddenly attacked a 53-year-old homeless man named James McGilvery. His bloody execution by stabbing was recorded on CCTV, and the police managed to release a composite photo of the killer in the hopes of cutting accomplice spree short. But a week later, Ocampo committed another murder. This time, the victim was 42-year-old homeless man Lloyd Meadow, who spent most of his time under a bridge crossing the Santa Ana River in Anaheim. Middle Lake McGilvery was found stabbed almost 60 times, as if the killer had entered some kind of frenzy that they'd struggled to come down from. 2 days later, Ocampo killed another homeless man, stabbing 57-year-old Powerless Smith more than 50 times before discarding his body in the parking lot of a public library in Yorba Linda. And by the same time, Ocampo killed for a fourth time. News about the homeless death in Orange County began to spread like wildfire among local and national media outlets. Then, in early January of 2012, several newspapers published a series of articles about the investigation into the killings. One included an article in the Los Angeles Times, in which a reporter interviewed a 64-year-old Vietnam War veteran named John Barry, who spoke extremely negatively about the perpetrator and urged any potential victims to be as careful as they can in order to avoid being the next victim. And Barry's words signed his own death warrant. And as a result, Ocampo traveled all the way over to Anaheim to begin stalking Barry. In the following evening, Belcampo found Barry Nero Carls Jr. in Anaheim. Then, after waiting for the right moment to strike, he attacked and stabbed Barry in front of dozens of witnesses, fleeing on foot after killing him. These witnesses obviously rushed to call 911, and Ocampo was arrested while trying to dispose of his bloody clothing just several hundred meters away from the crime scene. Police confiscated a 7-inch stainless steel blade from him, one that was soaked with John Barry's blood. Homicide detectives then discovered that the murder weapon matched the one in the killings of the 3 other homeless men, and Ocampo was now confirmed to be the Orange County homeless killer. Only later, with the murders of his school friend's mother and brother tied to his maniacal spree, and after learning of his cruelty, Orange County District Attorney Tony Rakakis confirmed that he would seek the death penalty during the upcoming trial. Accomplice trial was scheduled to begin on January 17, 2004. Yet on the evening of November 27, 2013, Ocampo somehow managed to get a hold of the bottle of Ajax that was found dead after having swallowed the entire bottle. It was a coward's way out a way of retaining the dignity that he had denied to so many others in his brief but tumultuous life. Was its code of Ocampo evil, or was he a product of a broken society, suffering in his own personal hell? Who found that killing was his one true way of getting back into system he once had so much faith in?
Did you get a job yet? No, Mom, not yet, I replied. What happened to the last interview? Did they call you? It was Thursday evening, and I was having some snacks with my mom, and we were having a nice conversation when she started asking these questions. I didn't get it. She gave me a concerned look at my answer while I just kept my head down, focused on the bowl I had in front of me. I knew what her expressions were without even looking at her. It was as if she is trying to tell me that get over what happened in the past and continue to focus on what was ahead of us. Even though I had told her everything, I know she doesn't believe me and thinks of my story as a delusion created by my own mind. But only I know what I experienced, and getting over it is not as easy as people say. There is only me and my mom in our family. Father cheated on my mom when she was pregnant with me. She raised me on her own, but as I was growing older, she started to look tired all the time. So I asked her to stop working, and I myself started to do some part-time jobs. Our family is not very well off, so I had to work overtime most of the time. It was about 15 to 20 days ago when I couldn't find any job. I got an opportunity to work as a cemetery keeper. There were 2 shifts. First was between 6 a.m. to 7 p.m., and second was between 7 p.m. to 6 a.m. For some reason, the pay for the evening shift was way higher than the day one, but still people were rejecting the offer. As I was already in urgent need of money, I took the evening shift as an opportunity to earn some extra cash, but I had no idea back then what was the real reason behind people not accepting this job, even after pay being this high. It was the first day of my job. I tried to take as much sleep as I could for the day so that I would be able to focus on my job during night, but I woke up around 4 p.m. and couldn't sleep after that. The cemetery wasn't that far, so I head out for the job around 6:30 p.m. I reached there on time. It looked like a pretty old cemetery, and no one was visiting at that hour. There was a cabin at the end of cemetery just around the corner. I guess that must be for the cemetery keepers. I walked towards it, and I was walking, I saw an old man, must be in his late 50s, from the small window in cabin. He was sitting in the wooden chair placed inside the cabin. The chair must be for keepers to sit and look and have a watch in the cemetery from that small window. I figured he must be another keeper besides me. Why did they hire another one when they already had a keeper? It's not like people visit at this hour, and there is absolutely no possibility of a robbery at this place. That's what I was thinking at the moment. I walked inside, looked at him, and introduced myself. "Hi, my name is Luca. I'm the new keeper." He stared at me, but no response. It felt awkward to me, so again tried to make the environment a bit of lighter and asked him if he was also a keeper, but he didn't respond. He stood up and walked out. I shrugged my shoulders, sat in the chair, and started to look outside. Several hours passed. I opened my phone to check time, and it was 12:50 a.m. I was feeling bored because there was absolutely nothing to do, and I was also getting a bit sleepy. I tried my best to stay awake, but it failed, and I fell asleep. I saw myself standing in the middle of the cemetery, and I guessed that I must be dreaming. I looked around and saw someone burying something. It was hard to see the man's face from the distance, so I walked a bit closer. I fell back when I saw it was the old man from earlier. He was burying a boy's body. He looked like a teenager to me. Old man's hand was dirtier with the mud and blood of the boy. He turned around looking straight past me, scanning the area, trying to see if anyone's coming or not. I guessed he couldn't see me. After he was finished burying, he went ahead, washed his hands, and sat in the chair in the cabin. I was suddenly in a different scenario. It was evening time. The old man was watching from his cabin. I looked towards the direction, and there were two boys who were sitting in front of a grave where their parents were buried. The old man got up and walked towards them. He started asking them sympathetically about their family and why they were alone there. The boys told him that their only remaining family was each other, and they don't have anyone else. He looked at him with weird eyes, and then his expression quickly changed again to the sympathetic one. He took the boys to the cabin and started talking to them. Between the conversation, old man tooled out some sweets to eat and gave it to them. They suddenly passed out as they were eating. After that, the old man took out their clothes one by one and started raping them. After raping, he took out a large plastic and placed them over that. And then, he first cut their bodies in two halves, and then buried only the upper parts of both in one grave. Then he came back to the cabin and raped the lower halves of their bodies several times over the night. As the sun was about to come out within hours, he buried the rest of the bodies as well. Scenario changed again, and suddenly there was another young teen boy who he had called in. Old man offered the boy sweets, but he refused, saying he doesn't feel like eating anything. The man started to force him to eat, so he stood up to leave. But as he walks outside, the old man hit him in the head and he passed out. Old man was dragging him inside the cabin, but the boy woke up and struggled to get free. The man looked annoyed by that and jumped over to rape him, but the boy kicked him with all his might. He fell backward, his head hit one of the tombstones and started to bleed. The boy ran outside the cemetery without even looking back. The old man kept staring at his back while taking his last breath. I woke up from a sharp pain in my back, which felt like getting scratched from something. I noticed I was being dragged, so I tried to look around, but there was no one around me. Then I noticed the old man standing at a distance, glaring at me with a monstrous look on his face. I was being dragged towards him. I started to scream for help. I tried to grab whatever came in my way to stop it, but it did not. I was screaming from the top of my lungs so that someone can hear me, but no one could. And I was sure at the time that I am going to die here. At the same time, I felt an invisible force pulling me from the opposite direction, so I looked at the old man's face, but it wasn't him. His face looked annoyed. I looked above my head, but nobody was there. But then suddenly, a figure of the boy who I'm seeing in the dream appeared, and he pulled me toward himself. Once again, I looked toward old man, but there were multiples of teenagers surrounding him, and then they all vanished. I got up immediately and ran outside, terrified from the cemetery. After that, I went straight home and locked myself in my room. My mom was worried from my sudden behavior and return, so she started to knock on the door and ask me questions. I didn't come out my room for 3 days, and when I came out, I told my mom about everything. She looked worried about me, but I know she didn't believe me. She thought I may have gotten scared from a nightmare, but only I know that it wasn't the case. As I bustled about the kitchen preparing for the Christmas party that my daughter Carol had insisted on having, her voice suddenly echoed through the hallway. "Dad, can I please invite Liam?" she asked, her tone hopeful. I paused in my work, my mind racing. I had forbidden any boys from attending the party, but I didn't want to disappoint Carol. However, there was also my little girl's safety in mind. "No," I replied firmly. "I told you no boys are allowed in this party." Carol peeked into the kitchen, her eyes pleading. "But Dad," she began, but I cut her off. "No buts," I said. "You promised. I'm working my ass off for this party, and now it's up to you to keep your end of the deal." Carol looked hurt and frustrated, but I didn't give her a chance to argue. "I need to focus on my preparations," I said, shushing her. As she walked away sulking, I couldn't help but wonder if I made the right decision. On the evening of the party, Carol's friends started arriving at 7 p.m. I asked my child to assist with serving the guests and attending to their needs. As the party was intended for the children, I believed that my presence wasn't necessary, so I informed Carol and my other children that I'd be retiring from my room for a nap. Before leaving, I made sure to instruct them to keep an eye on things and ensure that everything went smoothly while I was resting. It was important to me that everyone have a good time at the party, and I trusted my children to take care of any issues that may have arisen. I don't remember how long I was asleep. When I opened my eyes, there was an eerie silence that was permeating throughout the house. It was strange, because there was supposed to be a party going on. I got up from my bed and walked hurriedly to the living room, hoping to find some explanation for the silence. But to my horror, the living room was empty. There wasn't a single soul in sight. As a sense of dread started to form in my gut, I began to search throughout the house for any sign of life. I called out the names of my children, but there was no response. The silence was deafening, only to be broken by the sound of my pounding heart, and the emptiness of the house was suffocating. I couldn't even hear the sound of wind outside, which was weird, since it was supposed to be howling on this day of the month. I stepped outside only to be greeted by a blanket of snow and a biting cold that would have made me shiver if I had remembered to grab my jacket. But I was too worried to feel the cold. I looked around. The whole town was empty. The shops were open, but there was no one in sight. The Christmas decorations were still up, but there were no people around to enjoy them. My heart raced as I frantically searched for my kids, hoping that they were safe and sound. The fear that gripped me was overwhelming, and I couldn't shake it off. I wondered what could have happened to everyone and why they had abandoned the town. When hours passed, I was still standing alone outside my house, shivering with no success. I wanted to cry, but I knew even if I did, it would be no use. The sound of my heartbeat filled my ears as I tried to make sense of what was happening. It felt as if the world had come to a standstill, and everything around me was frozen in time. I felt a chill run down my spine. I wondered, is this some kind of nightmare? Or am I still asleep? With a lump of tears forming inside my throat, I once again began searching around town to find answers, to see if I could find them. To be honest, at that moment I was selfish. I didn't care if everyone else remained disappeared, as long as I could find my children. I called out their names again and again, but the only response I was met with was the sound echoing of my voice bouncing off the empty streets. I ran toward the park where they usually were, but it was also empty. The swings were still moving, but there was no one on them. I looked around, feeling helpless and scared. Where could they have gone? At this point, I broke down and fell to my knees. The sound of my sniffling echoed through the surroundings as I desperately wished for a miracle. As someone who didn't believe in God anymore, I prayed that if there was a God, He would help me. Exhausted and hopeless after hours of searching and crying, I trudged back home and decided to give the house one last look. I grasped the door handle, steeling myself for the disappointment that was sure to follow. But as I turned the handle, a sudden noise emanating from inside the house rekindled a flicker of hope in my heart. Hastily pushing open the door, I was greeted by an unexpected sight. My daughter was standing in the living room, animatedly chatting with a young man whom I recognized as someone she had sneakily invited over. Overwhelmed with emotion, I rushed forward and enveloped my daughter in a tight embrace, tears streaming down my face. "Dad, you're embarrassing me," she whispered, a mixture of amusement and exasperation in her voice. But I couldn't help but smile. As I pondered the events that had just unfolded, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had somehow slipped into a parallel dimension, perhaps the mirror world, where time and space work differently. Despite my confusion, I felt grateful that my desperate prayers had been answered. Everything had returned to normal, and my horror was over, while I prayed once more that it won't happen again. Ghosts? I know we all agree ghosts don't exist, right? Especially not in a crowded place. But 4 years ago, there was this one incident where it was not just me, but others witnessed it too. It was the day I had finally returned to work after taking a vacation, and it was my first flight. I was working with the airline as a pilot for the past 6 years, and during those years, I had witnessed many events, even life and death situations, but never an unnatural one. Look who's back from his honeymoon vacation. Isn't it my favorite captain, Mr. Van de Kamp? As soon as Gabby saw me getting ready to fly the plane, she came with her usual cheerful smile. It wasn't a honeymoon, it was just a simple vacation, and you know it, I said with a goofy grin on my face, which she was the reason for. Well, it could have been if you agreed to marry me, she winked, and it made me blush. Stop messing around and go get ready for the flight. I patted her on the head while saying that, and then I walked off to the restroom. The pilot, Matthew Kowalski, reached the aircraft after about 15 minutes of my arrival, and we greeted each other. The two of us weren't best friends or something, but we were still on good terms as coworkers. We waited for the rest of the flight crew to reach the airline, and once they did, they started to check the flight plans and make adjustments as needed, while Matthew, Carl, and I were looking at the route and flight details that were prepared. After that, we calculated the correct amount of fuel needed for the flight and checked the speed and altitude of the aircraft, weather details, and emergency plans. Once pre-flight briefing, inspection, and setup were complete, the flight was ready to be boarded. But before that, we called the crew for a meeting to check if anything was missed for safety or any other thing. They told us everything was fine and there was no further adjustments needed. So we all went to our designated positions to get ready for boarding. Matthew and I took our seats as we were to fly the plane, and the passengers started boarding their flight. That was when Matthew said, "What are these children doing in the cockpit?" His voice grabbed my attention, and I turned near the flight deck to see 2 children were playing around. We asked Carl to ask one of the crew members to take them to their seats. It was dangerous for them to keep playing around the area once the flight would take off. I don't know if Carl asked them or not, but after a few minutes, the children weren't there. So we thought maybe they took them to their seats. Once the boarding was complete and the flight was ready to take off, I saw those kids near the deck. So I called Carl again to ask him why the children were still playing there. But instead of replying, he just gave me a weird look and went back. I looked back, and the children were no longer there. I could not understand what was going on, so I just let it be and started taking off the plane. Once the takeoff was complete, I heard Matthew saying, "They're here again." He was looking at the CCTV, so I looked over, only to see that those 2 kids were back and playing. Why the hell isn't their parents taking care of them? Call Gabby. She'll take care of them, I said with absolute annoyance. He nodded his head and called for her. "What is it, Captain?" Gabby asked the moment she got in. "Gabby, why are there children playing next to the cockpit door?" Matthew asked her, but she surprisingly laughed. "Sure there are." After saying this, she left. I could not believe she just ignored us and left. It was weird. The children were still playing there, but she went past them as if she couldn't even see them. It kept bothering us, and that was when she saw one of the captain crew members trying to talk to them, but those children kept ignoring them. He left to ask the passenger whose children they were, but by the time he got back, they were gone. We didn't see them for the rest of the flight, so we concluded that someone may have finally led them back to their seats. After the flight, we went back to the hotel we were staying in for the evening, and Gabby, being Gabby, kept flirting with me as always. It had been on my mind ever since the flight, so I couldn't hold it any longer. Gabby, can I ask you something? Oh my, have you finally decided that you're going to propose? But don't you think this venue is a little... She started babbling and joking. No, this is about something else, I said in a serious tone. What is it, Captain? She noticed me being serious, so she started talking a little normally. It's about what happened on the plane. Why did you ignore us when Matthew asked you about the children? What children? She asked in a confused voice. The children who were playing near the cockpit door, I said with equal confusion about why she didn't remember when she walked right past them. They were pretty hard to notice. Sorry, but I ignored it because I thought you guys were pulling a prank on me. There were no children in the galley near the cockpit door at the time. I stopped in my tracks as she said that, and turned to see Matthew, who was having the same reaction as me. Gabby was just as confused. We asked Carl about them too, because he was there too when we first saw them, but he replied similarly to Gabby, and said he also just thought we were pulling some sort of lame prank on him. We checked the CCTV footage again. There were no recordings of children there any time. Nothing like that ever happened again. But those of us who witnessed them believe in ghosts now, just as strongly as we believe in death. Sam, are you still hiring for that position? Senior Manager George walked into my office unannounced and asked me. I think so, but I need to check with HR first to see if they had already hired someone, I told him, focusing on all the paperwork present in front of me. It would be good if they did not, he said while taking the chair opposite of me. Pardon? I raised my head in confusion as I heard him say that. Well, it's because I have someone in mind. His tone was clear to interpret that he was trying to say hiring the person he was suggestive. Send the resume and HR will contact them for an interview date. I focused back on the documents and said in a calm voice. Now that's more like it. I'd be looking forward to a position answer from your end. He got up with a smile and said, walking out of my office. I know it was somewhat an informative sentence that he just spoke. He was telling me to only hire that person or he would make my life a living hell. I was working at this firm as a manager in a different department, so I was nowhere near under his jurisdiction. But since I was in the fashion department and he was in sales, the two of our works were always clashing. That was the reason I was always ignoring his bullying and continued to focus on my work, despite his weird remarks that I often tend to ignore because I wanted to work peacefully without having any bad blood between coworkers. I'm guessing he had caught up to it, and that must be the reason why he always tried to meddle in my affairs, just like today. But it didn't matter to me anyway. We needed to hire someone anyway, whether it was going to be someone he suggested. I was still going to conduct the interview fairly. I went to the HR department after that. I asked for the recruiter who was in charge of the hiring process for the fashion department. Guessing from his nervous expression, I figured he could not find a suitable candidate for the position yet, but I still had to ask because you never know. Mr. Pedro, did you fill a vacant position in the fashion department? My tone was rather strict, professional, and in response, he looked up to me replying hesitantly, No sir, but we are looking for it. No need. There's a candidate Senior Manager George is sending, so conduct a fair interview with them. And if the candidate gets selected in the second round, then conduct his final round with me. I gave him the instruction for the interview and then walked out from there. Since I still had many paperwork to look at, I went directly to my office and started working. About an hour later, someone knocked at the office door. I knew who it might be, so I told the person to come inside. And just like I predicted, it was the HR head, Jennifer. Sam, did you ask my recruiter to interview someone from Connections? She went straight to the point the moment she walked in. Yes, I did. But don't worry, I've given clear instructions that the interview would be just like any other, I said, crossing my arms and giving my entire focus on her. And who are you to give instructions to my HR? You know better that I don't like it when any of you try to meddle with my work. I can tell this to the director and both of you can get fired. You know that, right? She said, slamming her hands on the table. I know that, and you know this better than anyone, that I never interfere with the affairs of your department, I said. That is exactly why I'm letting this slide just this once. But you better start standing up for yourself and stop being a pushover, or you're gonna make enemies. At least I will be one. She walked out after scolding me. Her straightforward personality was one of the reasons why I liked her so much, and the way she always got angry when I was forcing to do something just because of him. But she knew very well that I did not like responding to his idiotic and childish behavior. But these days, it was just getting out of hand. That evening after finishing my work, I was heading outside the building when I walked by the smoking area and overheard George talking to someone about how he was 100% confident that even if the candidate he recommended bombed the interview, he or she would get hired. He claimed to know how to walk all over me and make me do whatever he wanted. Well, hearing that surely pissed me off. I took out my phone and dialed Jennifer's number. Are you still opposing my choice to interview George's candidate? I asked the moment she picked up. Yes, why? Did you change your mind? She replied, asking me. I did. And you said something about the director firing us if he knew of this. Can you inform him about this as well? I said in a calm voice. Sure, will do. Good decision, Sam. I could feel her big smile through her words, which were praising me. The next day after lunch, I was called into the director's office. As I walked in, I saw George already standing there with sweat beads on his forehead, ready to fall any second now. The expression on the director's face was of the angry beast who had just noticed someone crossing his boundaries. He was telling us that he received a complaint from the HR head about the connection hiring, which was strictly against the company rules. George tried to pin that on me, but the director got even angrier at this, saying he knew pretty well as Jennifer told him that it was his niece he was trying to get hired. Sam, I'm letting you off with a warning this time, but George, you will be suspended for a week. Your abuse of your power you have acquired with your position. In the meantime, I will be getting your employees investigated to see if you had hired someone else with a connection. This better be the last time, or else you will be fired without any pay. You guys can go now. He gave his command, and the two of us bowed before heading out. You did this, didn't you? The moment we walked out, he charged at me, but I grabbed his hand with a smile. So? I replied calmly. I warned you before that I can make your life a hell if you cross me, he said in a warning tone. It's you who should watch out now. He flinched as I said that before walking away. Just because I chose to stay silent, he took it as my weakness. But he had no idea that despite his position, it was me who could make his life a living hell. He was the one who needs to watch out for his every step from now on if he doesn't want to get fired.
In September of 2022, a 20-year-old Australian university student posted a harrowing personal account to the popular social media site. In it, she detailed the terrifying ordeal she'd been subject to after posting intimate pictures of herself on a social media page known as OnlyFans. One involved obsessive stalking, internet loopholes, and ultimately, a clear and present threat to her life. Only through a completely anonymous throwaway account that she feels safe enough to share a story, adding that her local police force had finally taken action against the person responsible. But even then, the girl made it clear that her complaint should have been taken seriously long before she was in any imminent danger. According to the girl, the incidents all started after she moved back with her parents during the summer break. The girl was particularly excited to be home as the family had just bought a new puppy. By all accounts, the girl was having a ball getting to know her new furry friend. But as anyone who's ever had a puppy will tell you, to say they can be erratic would be the understatement of the century. On night, the girl awoke to hear her puppy yelping at the back door. They were in the middle of the potty and went downstairs to let the dog out. She says it was as late as 2 a.m. and there didn't seem to be another soul around as she stepped down into the night. but I soon found out she wasn't entirely alone. "I saw this figure in a car," she said. "I could tell they were looking at me, but it was pitch black outside, and I couldn't make out their face. I felt a bit uneasy, but I didn't really think anything of it. Only when I go back inside, the car started up and followed me up my driveway. The terror of such an experience is undeniable, and even though the girl was so close to home, there's no denying that being out alone in the middle of the night made her very vulnerable indeed. I was terrified," the girl added. "I sprinted back inside and locked the door and kept my eye out for them in case they tried to break in. But as far as I know, they just backed out the driveway and left." Then she woke up the following morning after a terrible night of restless sleep and deep concern. The girl found an envelope and said her parents left her box. The envelope contained not only $20 Australian in cash, but also her OnlyFans username. "I thought long and hard about how he could have found my parents' address," the girl said. "Now working out the problem didn't start until I shared my Amazon wish list." OnlyFans and Amazon were both adamant that the security systems prevent leaks from taking place. However, it appeared that wasn't the issue. A third-party seller was not bound to the same data protection laws as large multinational companies. Although she doesn't know for certain how her stalker got her address, the girl is 90% sure that they got in touch with a third-party seller and obtained her home address in that way. Whether it was money, coercion, or intimidation that caused the seller to give up the info is another question entirely. But the fact remains that's the most likely of all explanations. After that, when I moved back to the college town where I was studying, I stopped posting content. The girl goes on to explain, but somehow my stalker still managed to track me down. The girl said she basically closed down her fans account and started a YouTube account because of how unsafe the former felt. Her first big blogging project was due to be a shopping trip to a local mall, but when she got to her car to depart for the day, she found that she had been ransacked. The vlogging camera was missing too. She said, "I know that's my fault for leaving it in the car, but I was using it the night before, and since I live in a gated area, I didn't think I would be unsafe." That she added that the camera was inside of her glove box and contained an SD card with unreleased photos and videos on it. It was almost like someone knew it was there. But as bad as it was, it only got weirder from there. She eventually contacted her building security personnel asking if they could review security camera footage from the previous few nights. And it was through this that not only did she see a man break into her car and ignore other cars in the parking lot, but she also had proof she was being deliberately singled out for targeted harassment. After they got the camera, they walked around the duplex until stopping near my window. The girl wrote, "My bedroom faces an outside street and the blinds are broken, so it's very easy to see in. I have a curtain, but it doesn't cover my wall into all the way. Look, what I'm trying to say is this person watched me sleep for an hour, so I have no idea why they didn't try to break in, but thank God they didn't." The woman explained her camera was later recovered at a nearby secondhand store, suggesting whoever is stalking her has a prior history of criminality. However, she added that the camera's memory card was missing. "I know he kept it as some kind of trophy, I just know it." She added, and has since moved in hopes his stalker hasn't followed. "I believe the police are still trying to track them down, but I have broken my lease and moved to a new place, so hopefully this will keep me safe." But what's so scary about the girl's story is that it seems like only a matter of time before the stalker decides to take things further, unless they're caught. Stalkers will only ever escalate their activities until their obsession reaches a deadly and permanent end.
In the early hours of Sunday, September 17th of 1995, 25-year-old Timothy Stone was driving his young family back from a cookout in their native city of Los Angeles. Also in the car were his 26-year-old partner, Robin Cohen, her 5-year-old son, Christopher, and her 3-year-old daughter Stephanie, and their 2-year-old brother Joseph. Timothy wasn't all that familiar with the Cypress Park neighborhood they were driving through, and given that it was almost 2 o'clock in the morning, he hardly had the best view of his immediate surroundings. And what was worse, many of the streetlights seemed to have been shot out. At a fork in the road, Timothy turned onto the 2000 block of Isabel Street, a dark, narrow, dead-end alley that was covered in gang-related graffiti, including one piece that read, Avenida de los Asesinos, the Street of Killers. Timothy had taken a wrong turn, one that would take him and his young family into one of the most dangerous places in the whole of California, the territory of a street gang known as El Avenidas. Notorious as LA's most violent Latino gangster sets, the Avenues, as they're better known as, have a long history of involvement with the Mexican mafia. Respect, loyalty, and secrecy are the cornerstones of their savage belief system, while any challenge to their authority, both real or perceived, is met with swift and brutal displays of ferocity. So, when up to 20 members of La Aves saw an unknown vehicle headed through the heart of their well-defined territory, they saw it as both a direct threat and a direct challenge to their reign. The Avenue Gang are also infamous for their participation in anti-black hate crimes against innocent African-American inhabitants of their neighborhoods. Their violence grew so prolific and hateful at one point that some called their actions a campaign of ethnic cleansing directed at honest, hard-working members of the black community here in Los Angeles. However, when gang members surrounded the vehicle, it would be abundantly clear that Timothy and his family were no rival gangsters or undercover cops. Not only did they appear to be a straight-laced Caucasian couple, but the inclusion of multiple children in the car precluded the possibility of it being some kind of law enforcement operation. Timothy and Robin must have been absolutely terrified as the first of several trash cans smashed into their vehicle. This seems to have been the gang members' way of telling Timothy to back off, and he swiftly began to make a rather erratic U-turn. Only, rather than simply letting the family leave, others threw large steel trash cans in front of their wheels, slowing them long enough for a group of gangsters to completely surround the terrified family. Both Timothy and Robin begged for the men to let them go, but they refused until they received a satisfactory answer to their questions of why the couple was in their barrio, or neighborhood. Timothy simply apologized over and over again, but it was no good. One of the gang members produced a pistol, aimed it at Timothy's face, and threatened to pull the trigger. In a complete panic, Timothy simply put his foot down, plowing into the human roadblock in the hopes that they could make a sudden escape. More than one of the gang was wielding a firearm by that point, and when the front end of Timothy's car smashed into them, they emptied their weapons into the windshield, sending round after round ripping through both flesh and upholstery alike. One bullet struck 3-year-old Stephanie in the head as she lay in her mother's arms. Her 2-year-old brother Joseph was hit in the left foot, and a bullet grazed the flesh of Timothy's back. The family rushed to the hospital, hoping that the lives of their young children could be saved. Joseph made nothing short of a full recovery, but young Stephanie was unable to be revived, passing away just a few hours later, her broken-hearted parents just a few feet away behind a closed door when her time of death was called. The murder sparked widespread anger and outrage, with former President Clinton summing up the national spirit by saying, "A family took one wrong turn, and because they were in the wrong place, gang members felt that they had the right to shoot at them and take their lives and kill an innocent child." Many wondered how such a horrifically senseless killing could occur in the first place, and as journalists descended on Cypress Park, the public began to learn of the pure horror endured by the neighborhood's residents on a daily basis. Not only were innocent people losing their lives in the crossfire of rampant gang warfare, but the hideous initiation rites of the gang's new members often involved them gunning down civilians in order to prove their loyalty. Cypress Park was a place where a run to the corner store for a carton of milk could mean losing your life, and for no reason other than you were randomly selected for death. Many Americans couldn't believe this was happening in the same country as them, but for others, it was the reality that greeted them every time they walked out into the street. Stephanie Cohen was laid to rest a week later. A dozen Los Angeles police officers served as honor guard, with 4 generations of the Cohen family filling the small stone church of the Recessional in Glendale, where cousin Michael Fanning referred to Stephanie as God's little angel. At the time of the service, the search for her killers was almost drawing to a close. They had profiles on all of the gang members local to that particular area of Cypress Park. All they needed to do was find the triggermen. Not long after, 28-year-old Anthony Gabriel Rodriguez, 22-year-old Manuel Rosales Jr., and 18-year-old Hugo David Gomez were arrested and charged with the attack on a terrified young family that was simply unfortunate enough to have made a wrong turn on a dark night. At the end of their trial on August 1st, 1997, a judge sentenced all 3 to 54 years to life in state prison, to be served in separate penitentiaries on opposite sides of California. The American people breathed a collective sigh of relief as the news that Stephanie's killers had been brought to justice. Yet since then, the nation has struggled with the violent gang activity that plagues most of its major metropolitan areas. With St. Louis and Baltimore boasting a murder rate almost double that of other cities, surely it's only a matter of time before another innocent family, both local and non-local, are unlucky enough to make a wrong turn that ends in their brutal, merciless execution. So this happened all the way back in the late 1990s when I was a college sophomore. Me and the girl I was dating at the time had been going steady for about 8 months, and since she was my first real girlfriend, my mom was pretty keen to meet her. And what better time than the holidays to introduce her to the folks? During the week before Christmas, my mom's family traditionally held quite a large gathering up at my uncle's place over in Sandy, in my home state of Oregon. Pretty much all my extended family head out there year after year from all over the Portland area, and since they've gotten word that I was bringing my girlfriend, the hype to meet her was huge. I won't lie, I was kind of nervous that they'd embarrass me in front of her, but that anxiety was totally misplaced. She got along really well with all of them, and despite some playful humiliation when a cousin of mine told her the story of how I literally peed my pants at the Haunted Mansion ride when I was a kid, they were a credit to me. And when it came to driving her back home, she seemed to be more into me than ever. We'd agreed to drive back down to Eugene at like 7 p.m. so I wouldn't be too tired driving back. But since we had such a good time, we stayed way later than we had planned to, and didn't get on the road until about 10:30 p.m. that evening. In the hopes of making the journey a little faster, I ended up taking the OR-211 instead of just sticking to the I-5S for the whole drive. Annoyingly, this didn't quite actually make the journey any faster, but point being, the OR-211 was pretty much surrounded by farms or these huge swaths of dense pine forest. So as you can imagine, big stretches of it aren't lit very well at all, and for some parts of the drive, we were moving through complete darkness, saved only by our car's headlights. But honestly, I wasn't all worried about it. I was pretty good at reading a map, and once I was back on the I-5, a road I knew pretty well, I figured everything would be all good. So we're just cruising along, in high spirits, talking about how goofy some of my family were, but generally my girlfriend was singing their praises and telling how she couldn't wait to meet them again. It's right around then that we hit a section of the highway that descends down this big old hill, heading up to the bridge crossing over Deep Creek. There, the highway is sandwiched by some of the densest forests you've ever likely seen, and there is absolutely nothing lighting up the highway. It's the only thing we can see from the front seats of the cars, like maybe 20 or 30 feet that our headlights are illuminating, and pretty much nothing else. But like I said, we're in high spirits, completely unprepared for what was about to happen. Right as the highway was starting to level off, something darts across the front of us so fast and so suddenly that I barely missed smashing into it. I brake so hard that I almost gave the pair of us whiplash. Then, when we're stopped, both me and my girlfriend are in a complete frenzy of, "Oh God, did you see that? What was that?" There are plenty of deer in that area of Oregon, plenty of coyotes too. But the thing that ran out in front of us was way too big to be a coyote, and something about the way it moved gave me this gut feeling that it wasn't a deer either. The shape was just way too slender, almost like whatever was out there had moved on 2 legs, not 4. Now, next thing, I know how completely dumb this sounds in retrospect, but my curiosity just got the better of me and I decided I wanted to investigate. So again, this was also incredibly dumb. I turned the car like 90 degrees in the highway so I could point our headlights into the woods. Yes, this could have caused a horrible accident if another car had come along at the same time I was doing this, but I don't think I was thinking straight at the time. You see, as a kid growing up in the Pacific Northwest, I've heard a lot of stories about Bigfoot and Sasquatch, and I'd be lying if I said that they didn't capture my imagination. No, I'm not saying that I thought I'd caught a glimpse of Gigantopithecus or anything. I know the stories are mostly exactly that, just stories, but a part of me just wanted to be sure. So like I said, I turned the car 90 degrees, turned on the high beams, and stepped out of the driver's side and onto the highway. I stare off into the trees for a minute or two, but I don't see a thing. Nothing is moving out there, and the whole scene was as quiet as the grave. But as I'm looking, I get this feeling in the pit of my stomach, and start to feel as if though I'd made a huge error of judgment. It was one of the most intensely terrifying feelings I'd ever felt in my entire life, a feeling like I was being watched by something predatory. I know it's a huge cliche, and the whole I felt like I was being watched thing is such a tired old trope, but I don't really know any other way to phrase it. My heart was pounding. The hairs on the back of my neck are standing on end, and my gut just turned to ice. So without turning my back to the woods, where I expected the danger to come from, I started edging back towards the car. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, I practically jump out of my skin when I hear the car's horn letting off one long, excruciatingly loud, extended blast. I mean, it scared me so bad that I almost straight up peed my pants, Haunted Mansion style. My first thought was that my girlfriend had ended up leaning on the horn as she climbed over into the driver's seat for some reason, because she'd done that once or twice before. But as I turn back around, I can see she's still on the passenger side, but that she's actually leaning over to push the horn in what was evidently a frenzied attempt to get my attention. I run back to the car and ask her if she's okay, but she doesn't say a single word to me. She just points off to a spot about 50 feet away from where we parked. I spin my head around to see what she's pointing at, and that's when I see it. What was, without a shadow of a doubt, the thing that had run in front of our car just a few minutes prior. Lit up by the residual light of our high beams, what I saw was really obviously a man, but he was covered in animal furs, what looked like a mishmash of deer skins, bear skins, and elk skins, and on his head, secured in a way I'm not even sure of, were these antlers. At the time, because of how closely it was to the holidays, I remember the words "reindeer man" just flashed into my mind. Maybe in the naive hope that the dude was dressed that way out of some misdirected festive spirit. But he certainly didn't seem in any kind of festive spirit, not in the least bit. Like I couldn't see his eyes because of the weird kind of head covering he had on, but I could see his mouth, and at first he kind of looked like he was giving us a smile. Only as I looked, I could see it wasn't a smile at all. This guy was just baring his teeth to us, like the way chimps do as some kind of warning. After that, he turned and walked off into the forest, never to be seen again. Obviously, right after that, me and my girlfriend just got out of there and got back onto the roads towards the I-5. It took us both a while to calm our nerves, but my girlfriend was particularly shaken up, and that's because she'd seen something that I hadn't. And as we drove on, she explained exactly what that was. While I'd been staring off into the woods looking for Sasquatch or whatever, she'd noticed him out of her peripheral vision, but was basically frozen in fear for a moment or two as she watched him walking slowly towards me. Or rather, walking isn't the right word. From how she described it, this guy was stalking, the way a hunter might stalk a deer. The way she puts it, she had to summon up pretty much all of her courage to be able to lean over and honk the horn the way she did. Then when Reindeer Man had heard the honking, he backed off a little before I saw him, and like I said, he kind of just froze in place before disappearing. I did a fair amount of online research when I got home to try and find out if anyone else had any run-ins with this guy, but there was absolutely nothing online about him. There are plenty of crazy survivalist types up here in the Pacific Northwest, and I'm guessing he was one of those, but they tend to be pretty open about their existence, sometimes even advertise themselves as militiamen or whatever, whereas the Reindeer Man seemed like he was living completely off the grid. I don't live in Oregon anymore. Me and my girlfriend during the encounter broke up at the end of college, but when we were still together and I happened to be driving down towards Eugene, I always avoided the stretch of highway that I saw the Reindeer Man on. I've told this story a lot over the years, and some people honestly just think I'm making it up as like a campfire tale or something. But it's not a tale. It's not made up. And it's definitely not just intended to be some dumb spoopy story. It's most definitely a warning to anyone traveling on that road at night, because if my girlfriend wasn't with me when he ran out in front of the car, if she wasn't there to spot him before he crept up on me, only to scare him off with a blast of the horn, I honestly might not be here to warn you guys. So please, this holiday season, drive careful, drive slow, and do not stop for any reason on dark, deserted stretches of forest highway. My family loves Christmas. We're some of the most annoying people that start putting up the Christmas decorations in mid-November, and playing Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas Is You for the first time every year has become a bit of a ritual. My husband and my 3 daughters always wear their matching pajamas, which I love, and although cooking Christmas dinner can be a bit stressful some years, I just adore being that family that all the relatives flock to when the festive season comes around. There's only one big problem. We're Australian. Time for a quick explanation. In America and Europe, Christmas takes place during the winter, obviously, but the months surrounding December are some of the hottest in the Aussie calendar. Down under, you are more likely to be sunbathing with your Santa hat on than sipping warm eggnog by a log fire. But just like everywhere else, pretty much all of our festive imagery consists of snow-covered winter wonderlands, fields caked in snow, and little robins red-breasted nestled in the bough of a pine tree. But where we live, in a place called Darwin, it's a lot more palm tree than pine tree. Like my 2 kids have never even seen snow, and in 2019, we wanted to change that. So even though people called us crazy for doing it, we booked flights over to a freezing cold Europe in late November. The whole trip was absolutely amazing. I found the flights to be a bit of a pain, but seeing some of Europe's most incredible sights given a festive twist by a dusting of snow was worth every minute of being stuck in that cramped demon tube. We saw Prague, Berlin, Rome, Copenhagen, Paris, and London. But what my family seemed to be looking forward to the most was seeing Ireland for the first time. The kids seemed to have it in their heads that it was some magical place full of fairies and such, and could barely contain their excitement, while the prospect of drinking Guinness straight from the tap had my husband almost as giddy as our 2 little girls. We arrived at this little Airbnb out in the suburbs of Cork, a semi-detached rental that looked like something out of a storybook, and before anyone even puts their bags down, they're clamoring for the Wi-Fi password. Now, my husband works in IT, and internet safety is something of a passion of his, not just because it's his occupation, but because he knows it'll help keep our daughters safe from some of the darker things that are out there in cyberspace. You'd have to ask him for all the details regarding the thing he does, but whenever we arrived at an Airbnb somewhere, my husband would like to scan the network to make sure it had parental locks and was otherwise secure. So, he's tapping away on his laptop as I'm having a quick cup of coffee when I noticed this particular look on his face, one I'd come to recognize as meaning, I don't like this at all. I take a seat next to him on the couch, leaning over to take a look at what's bothering him. All I can see is computer nonsense on the screen. I've never been very tech-savvy, so, much to my chagrin, I have to ask him to explain to me. He points to this line of text and explains that it told him that there was already a device connected to the Wi-Fi network when we arrived. He shows how he could account for all our phones and his laptop being connected, but there was one mystery device somewhere. Then he opens up another window and points towards a little icon, one that was clearly a little picture of a camera. Me being me, I try and see the positive side, suggesting that it's a security camera installed on the exterior of the property, but my husband does a lap of the building and says he couldn't see any kind of device anywhere. It's at that point that he starts trying to work some of his IT magic, and a few minutes later, I hear him calling me back into the kitchen in one of those dad voices like something is wrong, but I can't tip off the kids. His eyes are all wide as he points towards his laptop screen again, and on it is a video feed of the bedroom our girls were planning on staying in, like a top-down view, as if the camera were on the ceiling. We just go running up to the girls' room to find that the camera had been hidden inside a smoke detector that was directly over one of the beds. We still don't quite know who, but someone had been planning on watching our daughter sleep, which is just about one of the creepiest things that's ever happened to me and the family. My husband calls over the owner of the property right away to ask him why there was a camera installed in one of the kids' bedrooms. At first, the owner denied having CCTV on the property in the first place, and had the nerve to suggest that the video feed was coming from another property in the area, as if I wouldn't recognize my own bloody children. My husband had to actually threaten to send them a screenshot of the video feed to get them to admit it, and then they came out with a load of garbage about simply wanting to protect their assets. My husband then accused the person of being a voyeur and that he'd be reporting them to Airbnb, at which point they got all tongue-tied and couldn't think of anything to say. And then they just hung up. We called them out on being a creep, and they didn't have a word to say in their own defense. We were absolutely furious and thoroughly creeped out, having only narrowly avoided having that absolute dog staring at our kids all night. And even though it was quite late in the evening at that point, me and my husband got the kids to pack their things while we looked for a hotel nearby. It took us a good few months of emailing back and forth with Airbnb's customer complaints department, but we eventually got the refund we were most definitely entitled to. Airbnb also reassured us that they'd banned the homeowner from renting properties using the service, which did far more for my peace of mind than any amount of cash would have. I know there are people out there with those kinds of twisted desires and stuff, but never for a second did I ever think I'd run into one myself, let alone on our dream Christmas vacation over to Europe. The only thing that really worries me now is Airbnb's ability to keep this person and people like him off their platform altogether. My husband and I have pressed them on the systems they have in place to ensure their customers' safety, but they simply don't have any satisfactory answers. We made the point that this horrible voyeur could easily set up an account in the name of a friend or relative and simply continue recording people's kids against their knowledge, and the legalese email we received in response basically said, "We have no idea what to do about it." And that's the fear I'm left with, that somewhere out there is a little girl, lying peacefully in her bed, who has no idea that some Irish creep is watching them, doing God knows what while he does so. Right after I dropped out of high school and moved out of my parents' house, I needed work real bad. I'd have done pretty much anything for rent money about that time in my life, so I'm lucky, or unlucky depending on how you look at it, that the local cemetery needed employees. At first, the old-timers who had been working there for 20 or 30 years just wondered why someone so young would ever want to be a gravedigger. It was hard work, really bad on the lower back, but I soon adjusted, and it turned out to be something more akin to a free gym membership than an actual job. I mean it. I got swole pretty fast. And if I'm honest, it only ever felt like work if the weather was bad or we had an actual funeral on site. Otherwise, it was just nice to be able to spend time outdoors. So the way our cemetery was set up was pretty simple. The majority of the grounds were just regular grave sites, all pretty much the same size and same price. But the northwest corner of the grounds was a private site that contained much larger plots. These were reserved for much wealthier families, and the local undertaker made a lot of cash from selling extravagant grave setups to them. I'm talking whole mausoleums, statues of angels, and stuff like that. We hardly ever visited that area of the site except for cleaning and maintenance duties, and those were never left to me. I didn't take it personally, but the older guys just didn't trust me with all the cleaning chemicals and whatnot that kept the marble and brass fixtures looking fresh, which is why it was so weird when I got a call one of my days off, asking me if I'd been up to that area recently. My boss was livid. I could hear it in his voice, and he pulled no punches when he asked me if I had been screwing around on the northwest plots. Of course, I told him no, that the last time I'd been up there was to watch one of the old-timers using the marble cleaning chemical as part of my training, and that had been months back. He sighed, seemed confused and confounded, so I asked him what exactly the issue was. He replied that it could wait until the next time I was at work. I was worried, sure, but I was pretty sure that I hadn't done anything wrong, not deliberately anyway, and especially nothing that involved the northwest plots. A couple of days later, when I rolled into work, the atmosphere was incredibly tense. I knew something fairly serious had happened. All I knew is that I wouldn't have to badger anyone to find out why. The boss man walked me out to the northwest plot, silent the whole way, and I knew better than to open my mouth until I found out exactly what was going on. There was already a worker up in the plot, tending to one of the graves, and that's when my boss told me that if I had been hanging around the area, maybe during my lunch break, eating a few snacks among the opulent grave sites, now would be the time to tell him. I swore to God that I hadn't, that I knew better than to eat stuff near the graves, as I'd been well informed it attracts wild animals that can in turn do damage to some of the resting places. And that's when he broke it down for me. Something had tried to dig up one of the freshly dug graves out in the northwest plots. He said something in particular, not someone, because we each had enough experience to recognize when a grave had been dug up by tools or by hand, or, in this case, by claw. It was rough around the edges, obvious claw marks in the dirt as opposed to the straight lines carved out by a shovel. This was something in an emergency, I mean, for obvious sanitary reasons, but for sentimental reasons too. If local families discovered that wild animals were trying to dig up their deceased relatives, there would be an uproar. Something had to be done, and quickly. A meeting was called among the gravediggers in attendance. As far as we knew, the mysterious digging had been taking place overnight and was most likely undertaken by some kind of scavenger animal, a coyote, black bear, maybe even an escaped dog. The solution was obvious. Night watchmen would have to be present in the cemetery every night until the situation was resolved. And guess who was voluntold to be the night watchman for the first full week? You guessed it. The young guy. The new guy. Me. The only thing that made the proposal even vaguely attractive was the fact that anyone doing the night work would be paid double the regular rate, and I could definitely have done with the extra cash. First night of being on watch really sucked. All I had for company was a flask of strong coffee and a .22 pellet gun loaned to me by one of the other workers to take down any varmints. It was long, boring, and lonely, but once I adjusted my sleeping pattern, it got a little easier. Then, on the second to last night of my watchman duties, I was on a little foot patrol walking towards the northwest plot with a flashlight in my hand. And that's when I saw it. A flurry of frantic limbs digging at the earth. I could have shouted something, maybe even fired the .22 in the air to scare the animal away, but if I killed whatever critter was causing us so much trouble, I might be out of the extra pay, but at least I'd have my daytime life back. I crept up slowly, turning the flashlight off and sneaking stealthily towards the dark shape working away at the earth. I've hunted rabbits at night with my uncle before, so I figured I'd use the old flashlight technique to cause the animal to freeze for a second so I could take the killing shot. But when I did, when I aimed that powerful flashlight in the direction of the digging thing, I almost cried out in fear. It wasn't an animal at all. It was a human, crouched on all fours, digging away at the earth with his or her bare hands. I couldn't bring myself to aim the rifle. I was too shocked at what I was looking at. So all I did was start making as much noise as possible, telling them to get out of there, saying I'd call the cops if they didn't comply. They complied all right, but not out of fear. The look in that person's eyes was one of fury, pure anger that they'd been interrupted in their obscene little act. I swear if I hadn't had that rifle with me, if I hadn't the means to defend myself that were obvious to them, I honestly don't know if I'd be here today to tell this story. Needless to say, the other workers didn't believe me in what I saw. Some of them told me they didn't doubt that I'd seen something, that they disputed what that thing was, and I get that, I really do, but still, I don't know what I saw. The police struggled to determine anything other than maybe a few boot footprints, but it really didn't lead to anything else, as that individual ran far, far into the tree line beyond what I was capable of seeing. All I know is that it was definitely a person.
No matter how much I wish it wasn't, this story is completely true. I wasn't drunk and I wasn't high on any drugs. Neither was my friend, but I fear his state of mind might have been permanently altered due to his experience with these beings. Secondly, I like to consider myself a rational, thinking type of person with years of experience hunting and hiking around my hometown in Wyoming. I've seen all kinds of fauna and flora, so I didn't confuse what I saw for something entirely different. It all started when I went to a friend's house to celebrate his birthday. He was turning 18, and I was already 18 myself. His uncle, a man more native to the land than myself, was 27. Let's call this friend James. I finally got to his house at about 4 p.m. that night. It was January 25th. Since he effectively lived in the middle of nowhere and at the foothills of the Rockies, I was keen on bringing something with me in case I ran into some trouble, like a bear or something of the like. So I brought along with me a .357 Magnum and some binoculars in case my friend wanted to try and hunt some coyotes with this .223 rifle. We started doing our normal routine for most of the day, playing games on his computer, watching some TV, and just chilling out and talking about school. His parents were away on a business trip to a nearby town, so they left James and his uncle the house to themselves. The thing that James loved the most in the world was easily his dogs. He had 2 chocolate labs and a golden retriever. The retriever was actually fairly old. This being Wyoming and people not really giving a hoot, the dogs were left out all day. They came and went as they pleased back to his house. Sometime around 8 or 9 p.m., we heard his dogs begin barking at something off in the distance. At this point, the sun was long gone, but the full moon gave an amazing amount of light. I looked through the nearby window in the direction of the dogs barking. Even with the moon shining against the snow, I could not see anything up to the tree line that was nearly a mile away. "There's nothing there," I said. "Are you sure? They don't even bark at deer anymore," James whispered to me. The whole situation was weird. Fast forward an hour, and his dogs have not been heard or seen since the barking started. His uncle was buzzed and watching something on their huge TV. James was beginning to worry that something happened to his dogs. Now, wolves can still be dangerous in the Rockies, and they have no problem taking down a random dog that wanders into the woods. This is the moment where I started to get anxious, partly because he wanted to get his dog back, and partly because wolves sometimes kill sheep or even cows. So if they were desperate, I'm sure they would have no problem with us. Even still, those dogs were his family. So we grabbed our guns and we headed outside. We were armed with heavy clothing, as well as my .357, the binoculars, and his .223 rifle. We braced ourselves and we headed out into the Wyoming winter with temperatures 20 below freezing, going the direction of where we last saw his dogs. The whole time we walked toward the tree line, my veins were being flooded with adrenaline, the same feeling I got every time I hunted. But tonight we definitely weren't hunters. We were about 300 yards away from the tree line when James suddenly stopped With my eyes trained on the ground and looking for signs of an animal, I almost ran into him. He just stared at the tree line. He kept whispering for me to look at the trees. Slowly, he raised his left index finger towards the foothills of the mountains. As soon as he knew I was looking towards the trees, he readied his rifle and pointed it towards them. I noticed at this point that his breathing was extremely rapid and raspy, like he just witnessed a fatal car crash right in front of him. At that point, I honestly didn't know what he was talking about. I scanned the tree line over and over. I crouched down to sit on the snow. I used the binoculars towards where he pointed. It took me about 30 seconds, but eventually I saw what scared the hell out of him. There was something out there, and it wasn't human, and it wasn't his dogs. Something on 4 legs came out from behind a tree at the edge of the forest. It must have been about 3 feet tall at the shoulder. Of course, at first I assumed it was a wolf, or maybe even a small bear. A few seconds later, several more of these things came out of the woods. I didn't pause to try and count them, but there was at least 6 or 7, and who knows how many more were hiding in the trees still. We watched them slowly walk out of the trees for several minutes. These animals seemed strangely cautious or slow for whatever reason. Maybe they were scared of people. Then they eventually stopped as a howl from a dog or wolf came out from behind us. It was far enough away for us to not worry about it, but close enough for the unknown animals out there to hear the howl as well. I looked back through the binoculars and could almost make out the general texture of these creatures. They were now about 275 yards away. They looked pale and thin. They still appeared to be something like wolves or even large dogs. But my heart began to race when I saw what they did next. These things, whatever they were, picked up their pace fast, reaching speeds of what looked like 15 to 20 miles per hour, judging from how fast they closed their distance to the direction of the howl. And coincidentally, this was almost right at us. After a minute or so, James lost it and tried to get up to run away. I grabbed him and threw him on the ground as he started to run, but this caught the attention of the beasts, and they stopped. James and I, frozen with fear, sat down in the snow, weapons ready. I almost lost it as well when I noticed that the eyes of these things reflected the moonlight. They were orange in color. They didn't really glow like in some stories of cryptids. They were more piercing. We stared at them, and they stared back at us for what seemed like hours until one of these creatures stood up on its back legs. At this moment, all of my knowledge on hunting and animals was meaningless. I knew that some animals could stand up on their back legs, but they could never do it very long. I audibly counted to see how long it stayed like that. 5 seconds, 10, 15. Then James screamed and pointed his .223 to the right. I looked in his direction, and I saw a creature on the left side of the group begin to get up, and it ran away from the pack. Dumbfounded, I turned my attention to the rest of them, and I told James to keep watching the one that ran away. I do a quick count of the ones that remained, the ones that were staring us down. There were only 4. My heart pounded out of my chest. There was no way we could have lost something so large on these plains. They're completely flat and covered in snow. I looked to our left, and then I saw it. It was crouched down and trying not to be seen. I realized how smart these things were, much smarter than I would have ever expected. These things, they were flanking us. I whispered to James my suspicions of what's going on, and he had the same thought. I made up a quick plan in my head, and I relayed it to James, our best course of action. I told him to start backing away slowly, but to always maintain eye contact. As soon as I finished telling him my idea, I do another quick count. Now only 3 pairs of orange eyes. Another one went somewhere. The one that first stood was starting to walk towards us. I helped James up and I told him to keep an eye on our right side, while I looked to the left. We backed away, but these beasts walked with us, maintaining their distance the whole time. Eventually, we were only about 100 yards from his house before we turned and ran to his front door. We booked it towards his porch lights, no longer caring to be coy about the situation. Foolishly, I stopped 50 feet short of the porch, and I turned around. Maybe it was curiosity. I don't know, but I regretted it the moment I did it. My body seized up the moment I saw it. Those creatures stopped as soon as I made eye contact. With the creatures ever so slightly illuminated by the porch lights, I realized that these things seemed otherworldly. They were tall, probably 6 or 7 feet, and they were insanely thin and lanky, almost like a basketball player. They were so pale, and they stared right back with these intense orange eyes from before. I just looked back, less afraid but more curious, and a few seconds later, James screamed, "What are you doing?" I pulled myself out of the weird trance I found myself in, and I sprinted towards his house. I jumped inside and bolted the door, all while his drunk uncle swore at us for making too much noise. I looked out of the windows with my gun in hand, but I didn't see a thing. Nothing but fresh tracks. I pulled the curtains back where they were, and we heard the strangest noise, anything other than a person I've ever heard. It sounded like a dog's howl, but it repeated, almost like it was coming from a siamang gibbon, in repeated pulses in different pitches and tones. The uncle looked like he instantly sobered up after hearing it, and he started locking all the doors and windows in the house. To our surprise, all of James's dogs were back, but they were very frightened and confused, cowering in a corner. We watched through the windows for almost the entire night, until I eventually needed to fall asleep, but we never had any other problems since. Whatever these things were, they were fast, they were smart, and they were nothing I've ever seen before. It looked like some strange dog man straight from tribal legend. I'm not a superstitious type of guy, but I hope it was somehow just a really elaborate dream, even if my friend and his uncle can recall the night too.
I have been helping deliver newspapers since my dad started as a carrier when I was 6. Eventually, my dad was given his own distribution center, so when I turned 16 and got my license, I started doing them on my own. Most of the people in the depot have been there for years. They've watched me grow up, and I consider many of them an extended part of my family. We spent every holiday together. The newspaper never had a day off. Countless birthdays. But there was one guy who always gave me the major creeps. I was about 14 when he started, I think. I used to hang out in the back office with some of my other friends as the years went on, and he always hung out back there because he was also friends with these people. At least that's what I thought. One of them recently told me they only tolerated him. I never spoke to him because something just felt really off about the guy, but nothing happened until last year. I moved home following my graduation from college. I was already having a hard time readjusting because I no longer had any friends in the area and I was missing my college town. Creepy guy that I'll just call B started hanging around me a lot. He had a weird man crush on my dad too, always buying him extra gifts for birthdays and holidays, sucking up majorly. I did my usual nice greeting, keep to myself stuff. But then he started buying me gifts for no reason. My mom told me to just keep them because it was all stuff I liked, Marvel and cat-themed things. That was probably my first mistake. He started acting like we were BFFs and coming out to find me while I was sitting in my car and talking about how I deserve so much more than being trapped here at the depot and that he will do whatever it takes to get me out of here because he really cared about me and I deserve so much more. I never really acknowledged it because I thought it was really weird, and I thought if I just kind of nodded quickly he'd go away. This went on for weeks. Then he started texting me, telling me to sleep well after work and just being generally really creepy. I should probably mention I was 22 at the time, and this guy is well into his 40s. I started avoiding him, and he kept leaving things on my bench. I came in one day, and there were cat posters taped along the back of my bench. I kept taking them down, but they'd be back up the next day. When I started avoiding him, he made a Facebook group chat with me and my dad complaining about every little thing and just being a major jerk. He made a really rude remark about my friend who was visiting from Germany, so I blocked him on Facebook because I wasn't going to deal with it anymore. B made a new Facebook and remade the group chat just to keep doing it. I went away for a while on a vacation to visit my childhood friend in Washington, and when I got back, he was calling me by my full name, which I absolutely hate. I was tired and jet lagged, so I went off on him, and he whipped around and blew up 3 times worse, telling me I was all these terrible names, and I thought I was so perfect because I was the boss's daughter, and there was no one there as perfect as him. My jet-lagged brain broke down after he walked away. I'm glad I held on till he left, but I stormed out to my car and told all my guy friends to keep him as far away from me as possible because I was so fed up. He started texting my brothers, asking if they were on his side and if they had his back over mine. My roommate, who was a guy, started getting threatening texts from him about wanting to fight over me. Everything was spiraling out of control. My dad made us sit down at the local Denny's one morning to work everything out because he was so sick of B blowing up his phone. When my dad was there, things were fine. B said he wasn't mad at me, but I was just the catalyst the day of the fight and whatever. My dad left to pay the bill, and suddenly B's attitude changed. I was in the wrong, and treated him terribly, and all he ever did was love me, and I treated him so poorly. He kept trying to hold my hands over the table, telling me he loved me over and over. I put on a polite show because I just wanted this to end, and thought if I was nice about it, things would be different. Apparently my answer to everything is be nice and it'll go away. He walked me to my car after the conversation at Denny's and asked if I noticed anything different. I told him no, and he got agitated. Apparently he spent a lot of money on Captain America clothing, everything from a hat to shoes. I told him I didn't notice clothing like ever, and B got increasingly angry, telling me he did it to feel better about himself and impress me. Cap is my favorite superhero. I didn't even know he knew that. He had left the depot for a while, and when he asked to come back, I told my dad's manager I knew we were desperate, and I would be okay if I didn't have to talk to him. I wore headphones every day, my music full blast so I couldn't hear anything over them. He kept coming to my bench and would stand there waiting for me to acknowledge him, and he'd storm off angry when I didn't. He would glare at me if I ever talked to any other carrier, even though I'd been friends with many of them for years. My tipping point was something I found out after the fact. My guy roommate had gone to the grocery store late one Sunday. When he was walking to his car, he noticed some guy watching him. The guy watched him as he loaded the car and smoked a cigarette, and that's when my roommate realized it was B. My roommate got in his car and started driving home, and he noticed B was following him. He tried taking several wrong turns, and every time B followed. My roommate called his friend and said he was coming over, and when he said so, to open the garage to make it look like he lived there. When my roommate met his friend in the house, he told him everything, and they watched him drive by the house 8 times before leaving. No one called the police. I feel like that was the only thing that justified calling the police, because the harassment and stuff couldn't justify police action. I knew that from years of watching crime shows, and I was angry when I found out that no one called. I told my dad I wanted him gone. I couldn't take it anymore. Texts are easy to avoid, but now he was stalking us to try and figure out where I lived, since I wasn't living at home but renting a house with my brother and our friend. I spent months watching over my shoulder whenever I went to the store, worried he'd follow me home. After, he started going to my parents' house a lot because he knew where they lived, like he was waiting for me to be there one day. No one was taking this seriously. The gifts continued, and my mom kept telling me it was free stuff and to just keep it. But the gifts always came after something bad, and it was feeling oddly like an abusive relationship. Oh no, you're angry? Here's a gift to make you forget and like me again. My mom felt that way till her birthday, and a giant bouquet of roses and a teddy bear appeared at her job from B. We didn't even know he knew where she worked. After that, he started cornering me in the parking lot. I told him he'd been told to stay away from me, and I'd appreciate it if he listened. "Look," he said, "I'm sorry I took you for granted. I never should have done that. Are we okay now?" I was floored. I told him if he thought that's why I was avoiding him, he was more insane than I thought. After that, he was done at the depot, and I didn't see him for a while. A couple times I definitely saw him driving around on my route, but I couldn't prove it to a cop if I called it in. The last time I saw him, I was at my second job. I worked in a music store at a local mall. I was messing around with my coworkers when I turned around and saw him watching me from our hip-hop section. My stomach dropped. I almost collapsed and I started panicking. I ran him back and told my coworkers. They agreed if he asked, they didn't know who I was and I could stay in the back till he left. I was a manager, but I didn't think I could actually kick him out because he was just watching me. My coworkers said he was there for almost 2 hours just wandering around. Never bought anything. It was like he was trying to wait me out, figuring I had to go back out front eventually. He texts my dad now and then trying to get his job back and fix things. My mom told him if he ever came near us again, she'd call the cops. When my dad wouldn't take him back, he started showing up at my uncle's depot and then started a group chat with him and my dad, saying they needed to sit down and talk. I was with my dad when my uncle called him about it. My dad called everything a misunderstanding. I said I didn't classify stalking as a misunderstanding. That day he came to my other job, I decided I was moving back to my college town 3 hours away. Home no longer felt like home. I didn't feel safe going anywhere. I still worry one day he's just going to show up in my new city. I transferred to the music store there. I had worked with these people my senior year of college, and they have looked out for me even after I moved. They all know the story, and I know they would all fight for me if it came down to it, so I feel safe, but I still panic when we walk to our cars after dark and have to check the parking lot to make sure he isn't there. It's been almost a year, and all I can say is I hope I never see him again.
So this story takes place back in the early 2000s. I can't quite remember the exact year. It was late December, and Christmas was just right around the corner. My family tries to spend every other Christmas together, and we rotate on whose house will host the entire family. This year, it was my mother's turn. It was dinner time. And as you can imagine, with so many people in one house, it can get pretty crowded at the table. Most everyone decided that we're going to eat in the living room. Sometimes my mother didn't mind considering the fact that our kitchen table only sat, for I was sitting at the table next to my aunt with my small body. It was easy for me to sit on one side of the table with her. I had just stuck a large piece of broccoli on my fork and attempted to shove the vegetables in my mouth when it fell off my fork, landing in the cup of juice that I'd been drinking. I was disappointed, but the most rational thing in my mind. I got up with the intention of dumping out the drink in the sink, but before I could move, my aunt stopped me, questioning as to what I thought I was doing. I told her what happened and showed her the broccoli that was quickly starting to break apart in my drink. I turned to go dump the cup down the sink when my aunt stopped me again, telling me not to be wasteful and fish out the broccoli and drink the juice. I laughed, thinking she was joking, telling her, "You crazy," in a joking manner. But she didn't take it that way. Oh boy, did she not take it that way at all. My aunt went eerily quiet, and her face goes blank. I can instantly feel a cold chill run up my spine, and honestly had felt like I had stepped on a landmine. My aunt tells me in a low tone, "Don't call me crazy." My smile had long been wiped away, and I tried my best to backpedal, explaining to her that I didn't think that she was actually crazy, that it was just a playful spin on words. This didn't go over well either, because she grabbed my arm and leaned in closer, repeating, "Don't call me crazy." I instantly know that if I don't apologize, something bad would happen. So I quickly apologized to her, and that seemed to satisfy her. She made me sit down and hovered over me until I ate the now extremely soggy broccoli and chugged down the cup of juice. Now, this might not seem terrifying or scary at all. Well, that was just the setup for the events that were to follow that evening. Later that night, most of my family had gone out. I can't remember where, but the only people in the house were myself, my older sister, my aunt and her daughter, my second eldest cousin. I was sitting in my room watching TV when I started to hear yelling from the remover. It quickly got louder, and I knew it was my aunt and cousin. I'm not sure what started the whole thing, but I do know why it had escalated the way it did. The two were having an argument over something, when my cousin told my aunt she was acting crazy, as she did the same thing I had done earlier. But unlike me, my cousin didn't apologize. She tried to explain to her as I did, but just like before, she wasn't having any of that, and my aunt exploded. I'm sitting in my room terrified when I hear a loud bang from the wall causes me to jump. After the bang came my cousin's screams of pure terror. I was too scared to move until I heard Russian footsteps. I look at my door and soon see my sister running by. Next thing I know, I can hear my aunt screaming and ranting at the top of her lungs, my sister pleading and begging her to stop, and the psalms my cousin along with a loud thud noise. I finally get enough courage to leave my room and look into the next room. And what I saw was an image seared in my mind to this day. My cousin was on the bed in the fetal position, trying to make herself as small as possible, just sobbing. She cried so much that she left a large wet spot on the bedspread. My sister's laying on top of her, using her own body as a shield, and my aunt is hovering over the two, just screaming like a mad woman, and in her hand is one of her shoes. It was one of those women loafers with a light sole and slight heel. She was using the shoe to beat both my sister and cousin, swinging away trying to make contact with any amount of skin. She was really just trying to get my cousin, but didn't care that she was hitting my sister in the process. I'm frozen in absolute fear, never having seen anything like this before. Sure, Mother got mad at me and I got the occasional spanking, but nothing like this. I'm afraid to even say anything and fear that my aunt will turn on me and start attacking me. I slowly start to back away when I look to the ground. That caused my eyes to widen. On the floor was my sister's jewelry box. It was all wood and had magnetic drawers to prevent the jewelry from spilling out if you knocked it over. It was just laying on the round, all the drawers open, and jewelry spilled on the floor. I looked at the box, then to my aunt, and quickly figured out what that loud banging noise I heard earlier was. Yes, my aunt had thrown my sister's jewelry box at my cousin. Luckily, my cousin dodged it and hit the wall, but she had thrown it with so much force that it caused all the magnetic drawers to pop open. That's when I truly realized my aunt had lost it. I turned and ran back in my room, locking the door behind me, waiting for my mom to come home. I wasn't old enough to have a cell phone, and we didn't have a house phone, so there was no one I could call. I stayed in my room until the shouting stopped. Turns out, my aunt had just gotten tired of hitting and yelling, so she went outside to smoke. My sister hugged my cousin, comforting her until everyone else got home. What bothers me most is that the entire incident was just brushed off. No one said anything to my aunt, nor reprimanded her for her behavior. I think my aunts had made it all seem not like a big deal when my cousin deserved it, and so did my sister for defending her cousin when she was in the wrong. She was believed over us because we were kids and she was the adult. I know this isn't really as scary or terrifying as what other people have experienced, but of all the messed up things that have occurred in my life, this had one of the bigger impacts. I can't even look at my aunt without thinking about it. I will say this.
My family is finally starting to recognize the true person my aunt is, that her so-called discipline was actually abuse. They refuse to condone her behavior anymore, especially my mother. Despite the fact that I'm an adult now, my aunt still scares me. But at least now, I have my family to back me up.
This story takes place in Santa Clarita, one of the safest towns in America. During the story, I was between 10 and 17 years old. I'm now 19. Some context, we lived in a 2-story house that had 2 bedrooms downstairs and 3 upstairs. My family consisted of mom, dad, older brother, older sister, 5 dogs, and me, the youngest. Last thing my family believed, my sister and I had a third eye since we could predict a lot of stuff. But for now, we are only going over the spirits part of it. Now we begin. The experiences started pretty much right away when we moved in. One night when I was taking a shower, I saw a little girl outside of it, looking at me. She looked to be around 6 or 7. She had long, straight black hair and was wearing white pajamas. But after that, I got out and she ran away and I followed her. She disappeared completely when she went to my sister's room, and I actually saw her later that night in my dreams. She told me her name was Alice and she needed mine and my sister's help getting rid of 2 bad men. I agreed, but first she needed my sister to see her. So she played with my sister's stuffed animals and then my sister asked me if I touched them. I told her it was Alice and that Alice wanted to talk to her. Of course my sister freaked, but she'd meet Alice later that night and my sister agreed to help. The last request Alice made was not to tell anyone else, as once I do, they will all be able to see the men and her. After that talk, I immediately saw one of the men. I went to the bathroom, and walking back from it, I saw a really tall, white-sheeted figure standing in the loft. He looked at me, and I felt so much fear, anxiety, and dread. He came after me, and I ran to my room and closed the door. I cried hard, really hard. I couldn't stop because I was feeling pure terror course through me. After that, I questioned if I should even bother helping, but I still tried. Time and time again, I would run into him and he would chase me. He never really made noise, but he would tell me to stop running, and I never listened. It took a few months, but I finally broke and told my family. They all believed me as they were feeling the pressure from him and were all getting stress from it. Well, after that, my father saw the white figure. He was facing a corner of the loft and looked back at my dad, and it terrified him. For my brother, however, he never saw anything at a house. He only felt certain pressures, but he did manage to record my guardian angel one time opening his room door and checking on me. I'm still sad that the phone that had the video was destroyed in an accident. Now, moving to my mom, she was actually able to communicate with the man, but doesn't remember a single thing he said, as most of the memories in that house disappeared from her, mainly due to my mom's mental illnesses. But my sister did manage to see my mom talking to the air, but it was weird. My sister heard a deep male voice that had a lot of authority to it next to my mom. However, she recognized the voice was coming from my mom, and it scared my sister very badly. After that incident, time went by, and my tia, my aunt, and my Nina, grandmother, moved in with us, and they had experienced numerous things. First, my tia kept on hearing running upstairs when she was home alone. She would hear thumping and bangs, and even 2 male voices talking. My Nina, on the other hand, met Alice, but sadly couldn't communicate with her. The last story with them is about my tia. She got up really early every morning to go to work, like 4 in the morning, and one time when she was going upstairs to use the bathroom, she bumped into someone really hard that was knocked down, and there was no one around, and realized she didn't even hear anyone else make a noise or fall. Those are the only stories I have of my tia and Nina, but moving on. So I got 5 dogs at the time of all of this, and all of them would look upstairs and growl, bark, and just watch it very intently. One time my poodle went upstairs and something hurt her very badly. We had to get a cast for her paw because it seemed that something had crushed her paw. Last small story before we get back to the main story is about my friends. They to this day say that the night that they spent in the loft is the scariest moment for all of them. You see, there were 4 of them, and the first time they came over was when everything barely started happening. I had them sleep in the loft, and they all said that a tall, sheeted man was harassing them all night and scaring them. At the time, they were the only ones to see his face, and they said half of his face looked cut off. My friends would come over almost every weekend, but after that moment refused to go anywhere near the loft. Now, to get back on track, after some time I started to see visions in my sleep of Alice's death. She was taken by the sheeted man and brought to another man who wore a very dirty suit. He looked very disorganized, but he had Freddy Krueger-type gloves and slashed Alice. I kept seeing this over and over until one day I saw the killer. When I had to take a shower, I would have to cross the loft, and there I saw him, crawling on all 4s, stared at me intently with so much hate. He gave off an even more sinister presence than the white sheet. He was pure evil, and something I didn't want to deal with anymore. Unlike the white sheet, Killer never attacked anyone, but he was just a terror. Have you seen the movie Insidious, and the scene where the medium draws the demon on the ceiling? He's similar to that, and he even would crawl up walls like that. After he started to show himself, my dad saw him and actually started to sleep downstairs instead of his room because of how often he was seeing him in the room and scaring my father. My sister was getting super stressed from everything and told Alice she wasn't helping anymore. My sister never saw Alice after that. For me, there wasn't anything I could even do. I was too scared to even look at the man, and I was getting mentally drained from seeing them all the time that I told Alice I was done too. I was 15 then, and Alice looked sad and disappointed at that and told me goodbye. I didn't want her to leave, but I couldn't stop her, and she vanished, and that was the last I saw her and the 2 men. Things actually calmed down a little bit, but my family started to break down. My parents divorced because my brother almost died in college, and my dad refused to travel to see him, and my mom never forgave him for that. My sister suffered with major depression and bipolar and even PTSD from everything. As for me, the events from Alice and the man and other personal stuff drove me to a breaking point, and I developed paranoid schizophrenia. The paranoia of not seeing the man anymore, the feeling of dread and death lingered, drove the development. The spirits mixed with anger and hatred from everyone built and broke everyone. We decided we need to move on from that house, so we moved to where we are now. Now everything seems to be fine. My brother is in good health. My sister lives in Seattle pursuing her dream of music producing. My mom and dad decided it was best to live together still, and me, who had moved on professionally. Things really hit the fan in the old place, and it almost tore my family apart. The anger and fear that the old house had was too much for us to handle. Now we still have paranormal activity, but a complete 180 compared to that old house. If I were to give advice to anyone about spirits, never help them, as sometimes they will pull you and everyone else into something none of you have the power to help with. Last night, my boyfriend and I were driving home from Universal Studios in Orlando. We were rerouted a way home we've never went before, and we're traveling in basically the middle of nowhere. My boyfriend's speedometer is broken in his car, and he has to press the button to reset the miles after he gets gas, and this will be very important soon. We were driving on a deserted road in the middle of absolute nowhere with not one car in sight. My boyfriend realized we hit the 130-mile mark on his odometer. We needed gas, but there was literally not one gas station in sight. I put search gas stations nearby, and we found one. It turned out to be closed. In a hurry, we found another gas station 5 minutes up the road, and this is where the story gets weird. My boyfriend thought that he closed his gas cap, and we were once again driving along this deserted road. We heard a loud bang, and he realized he forgot to put the gas cap back on, so we were driving around this dark road looking for the gas cap. He finally pulls over and realized somehow the gas cap is still attached to the car. We get back on track to the other gas station. Out of nowhere, I had this horrible thought about something going wrong at that gas station. I pushed it aside because I knew we needed gas, and AAA is not an option where we were at the moment. We get to this gas station, the lights are kind of on. This road literally leads to a dead end, and with a gas station on it, the only way to leave this area was to turn left or go straight out of the gas station. My boyfriend got out of the car to see if we could get gas, and the feeling intensified. I have literally never felt like that in my life. My stomach dropping into my butt. I've been in very disturbing situations, such as almost being kidnapped twice, being followed home, watching someone being taken away in a body bag after being hit by a car, and even a paranormal situation. I can talk about these sometime in the future, but I had never felt like this before. I saw a white car pulling up the road to make a left. Keep in mind there is literally no one on this road. He pulls up and notices my boyfriend, and backs up with his windows down. I found this very strange because my boyfriend has a very nice sports car, and my mind immediately went into panic mode. I started screaming his name, and the man realized that someone else was in the car, myself, and turned left and sped off. Sadly, I didn't get his license plate because of how dark it was. This situation frightened me more than you can even imagine. It may not seem too scary, but it was easily one of the most terrifying things to watch because I didn't know if I was going to witness my boyfriend being robbed at gunpoint or something like that. The feeling and thought I had just 10 minutes earlier is what also made the situation even worse. I found a gas station with actual human life around, and we made it home safe and sound. Once I got home, my dad told me that the road we were driving on was famous for the many bodies being found on it. I hope no one ever gets put into the situation. And to the man who was planning to do something to my boyfriend, let's hope you never get away with it. This story happened when I was 15. It's been almost an entire decade now, but I still think about it quite a lot. This was our situation. My brothers and I live with my mom. I'm the oldest of 3, and my mom generally leaned on me to get things done. This naturally turned me into an adult from a very early age. Even to this day, my mom talks about feeling guilty for having to thrust adulthood on me so early on. She thinks that I didn't have a childhood, and maybe she's right. As you might imagine, my dad wasn't really in the picture. He was an abusive drunk, and when I say abusive, I mean seriously abusive. Up until the time I was 10, he lived with us, and whenever he would get drunk, he would beat the life out of us. It was always terrifying. The only saving grace was the fact that he wasn't always drunk or had alcohol in the house. In fact, there were sometimes, months at a time, when he would go without drinking, and he was an otherwise pretty decent person. For all that was wrong with my dad, he would have probably been close to an ideal human being if he had not been for his rampant alcoholism and the demon inside of him that came out when he got drunk. The incident that got my mom to finally divorce him was horrendous. I had been in my room playing video games or something, and he was in the living room. My mom just got home from getting the groceries. He accused her of having an affair at the time, and of course, this wasn't true, but he didn't believe it. He kept screaming at her that she was lying. It escalated to the point that he pinned her down on the floor and said that he saw her nose growing, and then grabbed a screwdriver and cut into my mom's nose with it. There's still a scar from that day. Well, that all went down when I was about 10. So this is about 5 years later. My mom was bringing my 2 younger brothers on some kind of Boy Scout trip. They were both in the Boy Scouts and always felt left out because all the other kids had a dad. My mom's guilt drove her to volunteer and help out whenever she could, so she went with my 2 brothers for this weekend camping trip with the Boy Scouts. She really wanted me to go with them because she felt uncomfortable having me alone in the house. I insisted that I was mature enough to do it, and honestly, I didn't even have friends that I could party with if I wanted to. She eventually gave in and let me have my way. I remember being in my bedroom, playing with my PlayStation. It was a pretty typical Saturday afternoon, but then I heard a car pull up. I didn't know who it was at first, and I immediately got really panicked that I was going to have to call the cops. My bedroom window doesn't have a really good view at the driveway, so it took me a second, but after studying the part of the car that I could see, I recognized that it was my father's car. I was immediately mortified. I was on bad terms with him, and my mom had a really serious restraining order put on him after they had separated. I got really nervous, and I was not sure what I should even do. He didn't come into the house for a few minutes, and I immediately started wondering what he was up to. I did the only thing that I could think of and cracked my window so I could hear what was going on outside. I thought that if I could hear what he was doing, I would have a better idea. I immediately recognized that he was crying. His whimpering sound was really intense. I hadn't heard from him in years, and my mom said that we would never see him again. But here he was, crying in our driveway. He paced around for a few minutes before finally standing still. I could hear his crying getting louder. Then he screamed. All I heard was a gunshot. The second I heard the gunshot, I immediately knew what had happened. I ran outside. I looked down at my father's lifeless body on the driveway cement. Blood everywhere. As traumatic as it may have been, I didn't cry. I didn't act emotional or anything. I just called the police. They got there a few minutes later and took me into custody. They wanted to keep me safe and secure until they could contact my mom. The rest of the story played out exactly as you would imagine. My mom apologized profusely. I had to answer some questions to the police. Nothing out of the ordinary. I don't really know what to make of the situation. I don't have much sympathy for the guy, and part of me is kind of happy that he did it. But looking back, I just kind of wish that he had done it where I wouldn't have had to have witnessed it. The entire experience made me never want to go stay home by myself ever again. It's been a long time since this whole thing had gone down, and even now, if I have to stay home by myself, I will make an effort to leave the house or to invite a friend over. I won't stay there alone. A couple of years have passed since this entire situation, and I can't help but to think that it was all for the better. My dad was a seriously destructive human being, and I know this might sound terrible, but I just wish that he had done it sooner. For those out there that haven't lived with a toxic and negative parental figure, consider yourself extremely lucky. The tribulations that I had to endure at the hands of my father fostered a lot of rage inside of me.